Come to order. It is Tuesday, November 29th. This is our regular City Council meeting, 7 o'clock in the evening, for those not watching live, which I don't know if you will be. Roll call, please.
Roll call with the exception of Councilmember Rosansky. All council members are present.
Okay, we'll have a pledge of allegiance from Councilman Selich and invocation from our city manager, Homer Bludow. Please stand.
An attitude of prayer. Almighty God, remind us all of our responsibilities that come with our privileges and abundant freedoms. As we pray for our city, let us remember those dedicated people who live and work here. Help us to be good neighbors to one another. And let us offer a warm welcome to the guest of the city, especially tonight's guest from Antibes, France, our sister city. This evening we pray for our city council as it meets and conducts the business of the people with their vision and compassion, their integrity and concern for this city. May they seek common ground in the decisions they make, keeping in mind the challenges. And let their decisions benefit the common good of all who are part of Newport Beach. Amen.
Please be seated. Our first order of business is to welcome the sister city, Antibes, France, to our city council tonight, our city council meeting, and to our city. We are most pleased that you are here. We are most pleased that our sister city delegation from here, who made all the arrangements, and who also previously did the reverse, where we visited Antibes, France in July, including myself, Mr. Webb, Homer Bludow, and others, and had a wonderful, wonderful experience hosted by Antibes, France, and we hope to do the same here. So tonight is our first chance to welcome the official French delegation and our host sister city delegation from Newport Beach. And so I would like to start. Please stand up. We would like to play, in honor of Antibes, France, the French national anthem. Thank you. Please be seated. Our next order of business is for me to read two proclamations, or rather, me to read the proclamation in English and to have Marie Atkins read the same proclamation in French. I'm not quite as linguistically suitable as was Mayor Leonetti when I was in Antibes, France, where he read the proclamation in English, and I was tongue-tied and said nothing in French. And my apologies. Okay, I'm going to read our proclamation. Whereas the cities of Antibes and Newport Beach are celebrating the year 2005 as the 15th anniversary of a sister city's relationship. During this 15-year people-to-people relationship, the cities have exchanged with city officials, visitor delegation, and student exchanges, as well as visits of other groups. The bonds of lifelong friendships, goodwill, and understanding have resulted from these strong community-spirited cultural and educational exchanges. The current City of Newport Beach delegation for our official sister city exchange with Antibes are myself, Jan and Don Webb, Newport City Manager Homer Bludow, Marie and Larry Adkins, Faye and Joe Bosler, Karen and Don Evarts, Teddy and Sam Tate, Sally Lunn, Sherry Myers, Lynn Brown, Janet Hodges, Connie and Mike Skibba, and Dan and Elizabeth Hoffman. Now therefore, as the mayor, on behalf of my entire city council and the citizens of Newport Beach, we extend our warmest wishes and congratulations to the city and citizens of Antibes, France. And we commemorate our 15 years of friendship, and we send our best wishes for the next 15 years of close interpersonal ties between our people. Thank you. Now, Marie, can you read that in French for us? Thank you.
Ok, proclamation. Alors que les villes d'Antibes et de Newport Beach célèbrent l'année 2005, marquant le 15e anniversaire des liens de jumelage, alors que pendant cette période de 15 ans de relations, nos deux villes ont participé à l'échange de représentants officiels, de délégations de visiteurs et d'étudiants, ainsi que d'autres groupes, et alors que des liens d'amitié durables, de bonne volonté et de compréhension mutuelle ont résulté de ces échanges d'esprit culturel et éducationnel dont ont bénéficié nos communautés. Et alors que les membres de la délégation actuelle représentant la ville de Newport Beach pour nos échanges officiels de jumelage avec Antibes sont Monsieur le maire John Heffman, Jan and Don Webb, le directeur de la ville de Newport Beach, Homer Bludow, Marie et Larry Atkins, Faye Joe Bosler, Karen et Don Everts, Teddy et Sam Tate, Sally Lunn, Sherry Myers, Lynn Brown, Janet Hodges, Connie et Max Skiba et Dan et Elizabeth Hoffman. Et maintenant, par conséquent, moi-même, John Hefferman, maire de la ville de Newport Beach, au nom des membres du conseil municipal, des employés de la mairie et des citoyens de Newport Beach, nous offrons nos plus sincères félicitations à la ville et aux citoyens d'Antibes, France, pour célébrer nos 15 ans d'amitié et nous adressons nos meilleurs vœux pour les 15 prochaines années de liens personnels et amicaux entre nos peuples. En témoignage duquel j'ai appliqué de ma propre main le sceau de la ville de Newport Beach d'être apposé ce 29 novembre 2005. Signé par John Hefferman, maire de Newport Beach.
Marie, maybe you could introduce each of their delegation, which we're happy to host, and also your delegation, your sister cities group as well.
Very good. So I'd be glad to introduce Mrs. Leonetti. Please stand up here. She's Mr. Leonetti's wife. Mr. Leonetti, you know, is the mayor of Newport Beach. You met him when you went there last July. He's also a member of the French Parliament and had to attend the session of the French Parliament that he could not miss. So his wife is there to represent him in the city as well. And I have Monsieur Rambaud, Deputy Mayor and Delegate to Tourism for the city of Antibes. Monsieur Eric Projet, Delegate to Sports, also member of the City Council of Antibes. Madame Maggie Blasi, also member of City Council of the City of Antibes. Madame Marilyn Perret, who is advisor to the Sister City program for the City of Antibes. Mr. Joel Chapiol, member of the City Council. Oh, so he's in charge of the cultural animation for the program in the City of Antibes. Mr. Perez is the husband of Mrs. Perez. Came along on the trip. a friend of Mrs. Leonetti. So that's it for the French delegation. Would you like me to introduce
Yes.
our sister city delegation?
Yes, thank you.
I have Faye Bossler, Renaud Faye. Faye is Vice President of the Newport Beach Sister City Association and co-chair of the Antibes Committee with me. So I have a husband, Joe Bossler. That's my husband, Larry Atkins. I have Mr. Laberto, who has been a member of the association for a long time. His wife has been a person. I have Mrs. Connie Skiba, President of Newport Beach Sister City Association. I have Justin Myers, a board members of our Sister City Association. I have Mrs. Sherry Myers, also board members of Sister City Association. This is John Webb, who's the Don Webb wife. Mrs. Benedict Bioche is a friend of mine and wanted to be here today because she's president of the French Association for the whole county of Orange. And so she's a good liaison for French people here. And we have Mr. Roger McGonigal, who is a board member of Sister City Association. We have Ruth Klein, also a board member of Sister City Association. We have Mr. Sam Tate, who is also a board member of Sister City Association. And
It's good. I'm going to come down and we're going to present gifts from our city
very nice.
as well. And that would be a good. That would be the next action.
Marie, while John's coming down
Yes.
over here, I just want to compliment you on all those introductions, how you can remember everybody's name you did, and what they do. It's very nice.
Thank you.
Yeah. Is that the Aflac duck?
Okay, let's go right down the line. That's all right. Oh, yes, good idea. Cute. See, it's a French. Yeah, I know, a little flair. Give this to the, give it, can we give it to Mike?
It's okay. Okay, everybody smile. Hello.
See? See? That's it, see? You're ready for the sun in Vegas.
Great. Thank you.
John? John, we need to let Mr. Ramos have a few words to say.
He wants me to translate something. Okay.
Monsieur le maire, mesdames, messieurs, j'aimerais tout d'abord vous remercier pour votre accueil et vous transmettre surtout les amitiés et le bon souvenir de notre député maire Jean Leonetti qui a été retenu en France par d'autres fonctions. Vous dire que c'est très émouvant d'être reçu. Traduction.
I may not be able to remember everything. Well, he said, good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of City Council. It is an honor for us to be here tonight and being so well received by the city and to feel so welcome. And I have to relate to you the best wishes as well from Mr. Leonetti, the mayor of Antibes, who regrets he could not be here because of the Parliament session.
Vous dire également que je suis particulièrement ému d'être ici pour le 15e anniversaire du jumelage entre la ville de Newport Beach et celle d'Antibes, car j'étais là en 1990 lorsque nous avons signé cette charte de jumelage.
And it's especially moving for me to be here tonight to celebrate the 15th anniversary of a sister-city relationship, because I was here 15 years ago, back in 1990, when the first signature was made for the beginning of a sister-city relationship.
Tell him he hasn't changed a bit.
On n'avait pas changé du tout.
That's, yes, you,
Vous dire enfin que lorsque vous êtes venu au mois de juillet à Antibes-dans-les-Pins, nous avons une réunion de travail qui était, je pense, fructueuse. Nous en aurons une autre samedi matin, je crois. Et j'espère qu'elle permettra de concrétiser quelques échanges dans le domaine culturel, dans le domaine sportif et peut-être dans d'autres domaines.
We had a very productive work session when we were Day in Antibes, as you remember, for those of you who attended. And we have another one planned, actually this Friday morning this week, and we hope to have the opportunity then to discuss the possibility of expanding our program of our cultural exchange, maybe to sports activities. We had talked about maybe a sailors exchange and other activities as well.
Enfin, encore un grand merci pour la qualité de votre accueil. Lorsque vous êtes venu au mois de juillet à Antibes, vous nous disiez que Newport Beach était la plus belle ville du monde. Ce matin, nous avons visité en minibus votre ville, cet après-midi en bateau. Et je pense pouvoir dire qu'Antibes-Juan-les-Pins et Newport Beach sont les deux plus belles villes du monde.
I want to thank you again for the wonderful welcome and the very enjoyable visit we had of the city today. And when you came to Antibes last July, you said that Newport Beach was the most beautiful city here in the world. And I can tell you that after doing a city first by bus of the all different areas of the city and by boat, which was very enjoyable and beautiful along the coast, it is definitely a beautiful city. And I can tell you then Newport Beach and Antibes-Juan-les-Pins are the two most beautiful cities in the world.
Merci.
Any other councilman want to extend their
Well,
ideas here?
being part of the delegation that visited Antibes last July, I too this was my third trip to Antibes, and it is truly, Antibes-Juan-les-Pins is still truly a beautiful city, a beach city, and we have so much in common because of the boating, the beaches, and the tourists that it's fitting that we are sister cities, and I'm really happy that you could come to Newport, and we had a beautiful day for you. Thank you.
Homer, I think this is true. When they leave, they can see the Rose Garden. Isn't that a gift from Antibes? As you leave, and it's not the best time of year for the roses, but we appreciate the roses all year long, and they're a gift from your city. We thank you again, and thank you for joining us in our city this week, and we hope you have a great time. And don't leave all your money in Las Vegas.
And maybe they can see the marker that does say that the Rose Garden is from Antibes. There is a marker out there on this side. Okay, thank you.
Thank you again.
You say bonsoir.
Okay, we'll come back to order. We have gladly welcomed and now sent off to better settings our sister city delegation from Antibes, France. We're back to our agenda again. City Clerk, what's our action item?
Continued business, general plan update, review of the draft land use element.
Okay, what's our roadmap tonight?
Woody Tesher again. We are
Groundhog Day.
we're continuing through the districts in the land use element. Last time, the only one of the districts you got through, but you did complete, was the airport area. So we will be picking up, starting with Banning Ranch and continuing in the order in which they're presented in the land use element. And tonight you have two colors as well as red print. The yellow.
Mr. Selich, before we get started, was there comment about what we had, a change over what we had done last meeting over neighborhood design? Is that something that we should address now?
Well, I think the staff's going to bring that up from the planning commission.
Oh, you are?
discussions
Okay,
after
fine.
that.
Okay, go ahead. Excuse me. So what page do we start on?
Well, first let me just point out that in the land use element in your packet this time, the yellow highlighting shows the changes that were made by the Planning Commission last time. The turquoise ones, which unfortunately are a little harder to read, are the changes the City Council made last time. And the red are the changes from the GPAC.
Sure, and if I can interrupt you, I think we're going to be working from the table of contents opposite page 1 then, which shows what issues were talked about at the last special meeting and which ones we will go through tonight.
We're starting with Banning Ranch.
Okay. Well, I think I heard from one of the staff members that we were going to go in the order
Yes.
in which
Yes,
they
the order.
are
Yes.
in the table of contents.
But the Planning Commission did go back and consider some of the changes that the City Council had made last time and have recommended some changes. The first of which is at page 15, and this is policy 5.1.5, dealing with single-family detached and duplex neighborhoods. In the second bullet in that policy, they wanted to change the word surrounding to neighborhood, so that, and Mr. Tesher is showing us on the screen. So it now reads compatibility with surrounding neighborhood development, density, scale, and street-facing elevations.
Not surrounding, it's just neighborhood.
Neighborhood, did I say
Yes, sir,
surrounding
you said
again?
surroundings.
Neighborhood.
Just a point of order, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
As we go through this, I mean, we're not going to remember all these things, so should we take votes on these little items now, or do you want to wait until later? I just don't know.
As we go, last time
Right, as
we
we
were
go.
doing straw votes as
Okay,
we
well,
go.
Sharon, could I just clarify as well that what the Planning Commission is looking at is material that we have not yet looked at?
Right now, we're talking about material that you did look at last time.
So they're going back over what we approved?
In
Only-
just a
Only
few
in this one
cases.
area. Only in this one area,
And there are a few others.
with a couple others.
Yeah.
In other words, what they did, they looked at what we did at our last meeting and had accepted most of it, except for very
Yes.
specific items.
Correct.
Yes.
That's what we're going to do first before we get into new territory.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
And the reason for this change was?
That surrounding is too narrow a term, and it could be interpreted to mean just looking at the houses immediately
Adjacent,
surrounding,
touching,
adjacent,
okay.
touching, rather than looking at the broader
Entire
neighborhood. And I think that what staff had always intended with this policy was the broader neighborhood, and so we're comfortable with this change.
I'm comfortable. I like that.
Do we have a straw vote? Do we have? Good. All right, good. You've got it.
In the same section, the last time the Planning Commission had asked for a new policy, which we forgot to insert. And this is a policy that would require adequate parking and provision for services such as trash enclosures commensurate with the size of new houses. So that if you have a house that has 5 bedrooms or something, the parking requirement would go up in proportion to that.
Well, you said trash enclosures, not parking.
Both.
Oh, well, I mean, if there are two people living in a 5-bedroom house, does that mean they generate more trash?
No.
I guess I'm missing that.
We may need two separate policies for this, but the idea was to make sure that you provide for things like trash enclosures so that the trash cans are not just out in the alley in new residential development. And then the other idea was, as houses get larger with more bedrooms, that we should consider increasing the parking requirement proportionally.
Why? And what was their reasoning? I mean, if you have 5
Because-
kids and they're all in elementary school, they're not driving.
And because they'll be in high school before long.
You have 5 kids in high school.
Yeah, but, that's at 16 to 19, I mean, then they're gone. I mean, you're requiring, what are you going to do?
Have a 5-car garage?
5-car garage? I mean, I just,
Well, the commission didn't talk about what the number should be, just the general policy that we should consider that it be proportional to the size of the house.
and you're assuming kids will park in the garage.
Well, how about the nannies and the other servants for the larger houses? So that I think a larger house does require more services, which would in turn have more cars at that particular site.
Well, I can support the addition of 1 car. After that, it gets a little bit problematic. I mean, if you have a 2-car garage, I certainly understand where you're coming from. I've had a domestic for years, and I can assure you, they would not park in a garage. It just doesn't happen. But I understand the discussion, but once you get into 4 or 5 cars, I mean, what are we creating here? Storage areas?
Basements.
Well, I think their comments stem more from the older areas of the city where the parking is tight. And I know that some beach cities, like Huntington Beach, for example, in their small lot downtown area, they have established parking standards based on bedrooms. I don't know what the ratio is, but I know that it's based on a bedroom count. And I don't think they're suggesting a ratio here. I think they're just suggesting that we develop a ratio in our zoning code at some point in time here.
Okay, so it's just a broad policy.
Any other comment? Okay, we have a straw vote. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. We got 4. Okay, is that enough? No straw objections?
Yes. And actually, that is, those are the only 2 things from material that you covered last time, other than some typographical and clarification corrections, and I don't think we need to go over those. So now we can move to Banning Ranch.
On page?
28.
Page 28. And we're going to try to handle 2 different formats here of the original slides, as well as then showing you the text changes made by the commission, since you don't have the printout of this. Banning Ranch, ever so briefly, in the policies that begin on page 31, basically, if you recall, provide 2 different options. One, a priority for open space, and then some policies about what might be considered for the site, or if the open space position is not, or the open space option is not pursued. Maybe, Greg, if we can go to the text, I can show the council the changes that were made by the Planning Commission. The first is 6.4.2. The commission wanted to set some limits, ultimately, to the time in which the trigger would come to bear vis-a-vis a commitment for an alternative land use. So basically, they recommended the insertion of the text, if not acquired for open space by, and then the insertion of a date, the site may be developed as a residential village. Staff indicated that there are ongoing discussions with the property owners, with the environmental groups and others about the acquisition of the site as well. And indeed, not ready to insert a date, but felt that it was something that might possibly be done in the future. So the idea on this particular policy was to insert a date. And I'll go through the next couple ever so briefly. Down on policy 6.4.2, the recommendation of your recommendation and direction for consideration in the environmental impact report for the number of housing units was 1375. The GPAC, as I think I indicated in the last meeting, went back to all of their original land use recommendations on a citywide basis. So they cut the number down. The commission went back to the number that you had originally considered, the 1,375 residential units. And Greg, if you can scroll down. So policy 642, they went to 1,375 residential units to the original 75,000 square feet in retail. And Greg, if you can scroll down, well, there was no change on the overnight accommodations. Moving ahead to policy 6.4.7 and dealing with neighborhood structure, this is kind of a minor change. They just changed some of the language about the location of the buildings in the village center. They basically stipulate that they enhance pedestrian activity and should not require that they actually be located along the sidewalks. Scrolling down to, I believe, the last major change in this section, so a couple of others, the circulation element was a suggested change from this is really a technical change, because if you see the original language here, it talks about a specific linkage from Coast Highway to Newport Boulevard. The reality is if you were to connect to those two destinations, you might actually have to travel through and involve land in other cities. So it's more or less a technical change to facilitate should it be A&D, an arterial highway link between Coast Highway with Newport Boulevard, recognizing that the city cannot have responsibility for the entirety of that corridor linkage. Moving ahead to policy 654, this again is more of a design issue. This is the issue of the discussion of the policy text originally said require the development be sited and preserve wetlands, the bluff faces, etc. What they modified the policy to read was to enable mitigation for the loss of wetlands or drainage corridors, but to require the preservation of bluff faces. So they changed the language to reflect some flexibility vis-a-vis the wetlands in the ultimate negotiation with the agencies. So those are the changes the Planning Commission made in this section. So we're dealing with the policies beginning on page 31, running through the top of page 34.
Okay, how do you propose we take these?
Well, I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Ridgway.
For the city attorney, as to the very first policy change where there was a suggested date, Robin, here's my, 6.4. What was it? Okay, 6.4.1. During that period of time that you have that date in there, this land is held in no man's land. I mean, that's kind of my question. Is it held in no man's land? In other words, is the general plan and the zoning allow, if we go to 1,375 units, yet we have a date in here, until that date occurs, have we not gone into an inverse condemnation on a temporary basis? It's technical and it's legal, and I have a discomfort with that concept.
If I could talk a little bit about the background of it. We have been talking both to the property owner and to the environmental groups who are interested in acquiring the property for open space. And this is one of the concepts that we have been making progress with the property owner on. Their concern is that the period of time during which we consider open space the priority land use not be without a set term to it. And so the real question will be what we fill in for that blank, how long we will say that open space is our priority use. But I think that the property owner is willing to work with us on this kind of an arrangement.
Yeah,
and there's a representative here this evening.
You missed my question. During that period of time, until that time elapses, you really have an inverse condemnation issue here. I think you do. And even though the landowner is being cooperative, I think technically you have a significant issue and problem here, and I guess I just don't want to go there with the date. In fact, I don't even want to go there with the concept of this priority use, because to be honest with you, I don't agree with the priority use of all open space.
I don't see where there's inverse condemnation. Open space is a use in our general plan, it's a use in our zoning ordinance, and it's a permitted use on the property, so.
I know, but
I
as,
guess I don't see where the inverse condemnation.
I don't know that the date is necessary or really changes
There you go.
anything one way or the other.
yeah, I mean, the language is there,
it's
not
a-
acquired for open space, that's adequate. I don't think you need to put a date in there.
Doesn't the land have economic use though now as an oil field? I mean, they do have,
Yeah.
other than open space, I mean, which would probably reduce the economic value of the property, but they have been pumping oil, so.
The open space designation, if that has, uses, then that's another,
Are you
those
suggesting
other uses
that
that
any,
have economic value, it's just not the same as what they have now.
are you suggesting though that any property down there would be a place for an oil site, therefore it has an economic use?
Well, it's its current
I
use.
think the current use is that it's an oil field and it has an economic use, an economic
Yes,
value.
but a land that has no oil rig on it doesn't have very much economic use for putting oil rigs on. The oil rigs have been placed there, the field is of diminishing returns. It is possible with a change in state law, I guess, that you could redevelop that field, but not highly likely under any circumstance. I can't see how we can say that an empty land has a value because you could put an oil rig for storage
You're
maybe, but that's the only
designating,
thing it's used for.
you're designating the property with a priority or preferred use based on the policy document, but then you're also going to have other provisions for how it could possibly be developed if it's not purchased and developed as open space, so.
Well, I mean,
I don't think you have a
let's break.
taking issue here, and I don't know that a date changes that. At some point in time, if they process the development and don't cooperate, or the city doesn't, or the groups can't reach an agreement for the sale of the property, then that priority preferred use isn't going to occur.
Well, it's an ownership decision as to the next phase of this property, right? If not acquired for open space, they have to agree. In other words, the city's not going to condemn it for open space. It's the ownership that
Right.
triage or however they own. I mean, and there's oil rights and there's fee rights and they're all intermingled over there. What happens next? So there is, albeit a preference, that preference could go away day one by them doing a residential mixed use whatever concept deal, right? I mean, isn't that true? I mean, it's open. They are open to do anything, right?
Well, they'll be open to do the open space or as the preferred designated use.
What if they don't
And-
come to a deal? What if it's clear from day
Right.
one the open space
So
guys want to pay
whatever the
$1
alternate
and
zoning is that the city council places on this property under this new general plan will be their other use for the property,
Well-
so there's not a taking. If the council chose to designate it all open space with very limited uses or any economic value to it, then that might be an issue that we'd be looking at, but I didn't go down that road because I don't think that's the proposal.
and no one went down that road, including GPAC, right?
Well, but I think that the idea behind the proposal of the priority use and then the planning commission adding a date was that there would be some period of time to be determined and agreed on during which there would be sort of a timeout on development and the environmental groups, the city, the state, whoever could try to gather the resources to be able to acquire.
Well,
it
no,
for
but that's
open
not what
space.
this is saying to me. It says that this is the absolute outside date, but that date could go away day one if some developer came in with a concept that fit within our pre-designated use, and they just made a deal with the ownership group, right? There's no compulsion on the group to exhaust all avenues as to open space.
No.
Mr. Mayor, the
Yes.
property owner's representative is in attendance. I'd certainly be interested in hearing his views before I cast any sort of vote on this one.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Mr. Webb.
let me approach this from a slightly different direction. If we say the priority use is open space, and we have the alternate as designated, and the developer comes in 6 months and says, I want to develop this property using the alternate use, what procedures do we have to do to allow him to use the alternate use instead of the primary use?
whatever the procedures are for the approvals to do the alternate use.
Okay, so in other words, a primary use doesn't have any, we don't have to go through any general plan amendments, we don't have to go through, the developer, if he puts his use out there, doesn't have to do anything special, anything different from a normal development process to get the primary use waived.
Without the date, that's true.
Without the date. Now, if we have a date in there, then he's got to wait to file until after that date is over to allow for the
And that was the point that
That's it.
Councilmember
First
Ridgway was making, that basically is a temporary period of time where they're not able to process
First
approvals for their property.
Evangelical, and that is compensable by the city.
Well, depends upon, there are situations of temporary takings that aren't considered.
Now,
So it
where did this
depends
change, this
upon-
came from the Planning Commission?
Yes.
Not from GPAC, from the Planning Commission. They want a date certain, a kind of a hands-off period for a period of time.
I think the
I
goal,
guess.
I think it was more, they wanted dates certain that not to leave it open, because I sat here and listened to some of the comments, and they weren't concerned so much that, they were concerned more that the date would go on too long. They wanted a cutoff period so that the developer or property owner would know that after this date, I can move forward with my project and not have to worry about the open space requirement. I think another thing that really comes into play here is I've been in some negotiations with city staff, with the developers, or the owners' representatives, and there's been talk of trying to work out potentially a development agreement or some sort of mechanism whereby there would be a period of time that the environmental community or whoever would step forward to try and acquire the land, and then other possible scenarios on how the land may be developed in the event that they could not pool the resources to acquire the property. So, in a sense, there's probably ongoing talks and discussions with regard to this, and this will probably not be the end of our look at this.
It would seem like to me, if we go into this with the understanding that a primary use doesn't guarantee that it's going to be open space, if a developer comes in with a viable alternative and processes his project through whatever the proper procedures are within the general plan. It seems like to me I could be more comfortable with that. If I don't see what the date would do for us, as long as that's the understanding of everybody up front, that the primary use doesn't guarantee open space forever or for any significant period of time.
And I don't think the language of the policies makes that kind of a guarantee, because the strategy is to support the active pursuit of the acquisition, and then the following goal is, if acquisition for open space is not successful, a high-quality residential community. So,
Well, let me ask you the hidden question. They gave us this deadline without a deadline. Who was supposed to fill in the date?
well, the Planning Commission thought, and I agreed with them this afternoon, that is something that would come as we continue our discussions with the property owner, because that's one of the things that we have been talking to them about, is how long they might be willing
that's
to
fair.
wait.
In a sense, this is a placeholder in the document. It's not
That's
meant to be
fine.
filled in
No,
at
that's
this
all right.
point. And it may change come April or May when we vote on this thing, but
Okay.
for the time being, it was really just meant as a placeholder.
Well, this one is fraught with problems, but let me ask another question. 6.4.1, alternate use. If not acquired for open space, the site may be developed as a residential village. Okay, maybe. Doesn't say it will be. So then we establish the accommodation of a maximum, let's say it's 1375 units. But does that mean the applicant has to come in for a general plan amendment? And
No.
then are you sure?
Absolutely.
And he's not subject to the charter amendment?
Well,
No,
This-
actually not, because
this is
any
less
of
than
these.
what's already
Yeah.
existing.
Pardon me?
This is less than what already is existing in the general plan.
In our current general plan.
Well, but what Mr. Ridgway's asking is that if they don't do open space, then is the other use already approved in the new general plan?
This is already set.
That's
in
my
the new
point. So
general
they don't
plan
have to come
what
back
their
and get
entitlements are.
875 or
Unless they
13.
wanted to do something different than what was set in the new general plan.
I appreciate all those comments. I would certainly caution the applicant to check with his legal staff because I'm not entirely comfortable with what I'm reading here. I voiced my concern about what I thought was some inverse condemnation for a temporary period, and I have a concern that they are not getting, whatever entitlement we're giving them. It's kind of a, I'm concerned we seem to be pulling the rug out from them.
Well, and if I might add, it actually works both ways because if we did pick an outside date, that might be more for their advantage because then after that outside date, if nobody could come together with buying the open space, it would default to this, and then there would be no obligation or really possibility of further negotiations and maybe sometime as they're processing to maybe come up with the money. So
then why don't we write it that way? It's not specific to that. Why don't you default it to that?
Then they're not so concerned because then it appears as though there's no possibility for making it become open space. So
I can
I don't know
maybe
whether
live with.
the council wants both of those options and then to see which one gets developed.
What's to
So,
say they
that's
don't
up
go
to
to
them.
the county anyway? I mean, are we not going to have that happen? I mean, if we play around and make a real stringent development on this, why won't they go to the county? Everyone else has.
Dick, I think that the property owner is here tonight. Maybe he would like to come up at this time if the council wants to indulge him at this point. But we have had discussions with them. I think they feel comfortable with the number that is here, at least the 1375 number, not the 875 number. The 1375 number, the 75,000 square feet of retail space and the 75-unit hotel. And so the gist of the discussions that staff and I have been having with the property owner is to entice them to come to the city and develop here, as opposed to going to the county, which would probably not be in the best interest of our city. So I think you're pointing out a problem that probably doesn't exist, at least with the numbers that the city council had recommended.
But if we put in this extra thing that we're going to hold all development on.
I think they're in agreement with that too. Again, I would encourage Mr. Basie to come forward, and he can probably speak best for the property owner since he's the representative.
Is this okay procedure-wise to take an item, specific item, have public testimony on it? Okay, council agree with it? Fine. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. My name is George Basie, and I'm here representing the property owners from the Banning Ranch. I had some prepared statements that were more global in nature with regard to the overall effort here, but on point here, we share a lot of the concerns, and frankly, I'm heartened to hear the discussion about the mechanisms here. But I think that Councilman Rosansky is accurate with the discussions we've had so far, and perhaps if this item was recognized as an outstanding issue, tabled for the time being, our pledge to him and the city is to continue to try to work in the coming months before sometime next spring when things need to be more firm and see if there's not some mechanics here that would make sense. But the whole concept is still a little bit mysterious and it needs a lot more work and a lot more refinement. We are skeptical, frankly, that the funding would be found and be sufficient to acquire the lands, but we're willing to entertain reasonable discussion for the purposes of trying to be cooperative to a point. So should I continue with the balance of my statements or come back up later as we walk through the other issues?
Keep going. It's great. Keep going. I mean, that'd be good. We'd like to get your the input from the ownership side.
Well, the Planning Commission was very receptive also earlier today. We worked with them and staff to develop the
George, at the chance of maybe cutting you off, I, for one, support everything the Planning Commission did today. And so maybe we can find out and poll, and then we can move on.
That would be fine.
So I just want to say, and the Planning Commission did change it back. We do have their notes. It was typed up. So I don't know how everybody else feels, but I support what Planning Commission did today, and
There seems to be a discrepancy in these notes, though.
Yeah,
Because it says 1765, and Woody said that they went back to the 1375.
That's correct. That's correct.
So this is
That,
not...
that was the original Planning Commission recommendation. This is a summary that Councilmember Rosansky requested. That we prepared pretty quickly this afternoon, and it shows what's allowed under the county general plan, the existing city general plan, what's the GPAC recommendation, what was the original Planning Commission recommendation, and what was the city council selection for the project description for the EIR, which, as of earlier this afternoon, was the Planning Commission recommendation.
Right. The Planning Commission basically adopted the changes that we made
okay.
originally.
Okay, well then, I support that.
I support that as well.
I do too.
Mr. Selich?
I do as well, but I'm sorry. But I
Go
think
ahead.
there's an issue with this, putting the date on the end of it, the 20 years, though. And
I would respectfully propose that we just recognize there's an outstanding issue, that we need to have some better definition around this concept, and certainly in a manner that you folks understand, that we understand, and that some of the other open space advocate groups understand, that makes sense, because we share the concerns that were raised by Councilman Ridgway with regard to being found in some paralyzed period of time with not able to do something with our property, so.
Can I raise I should probably know this, but I don't. Is there a long-term plan that this property be in the city? I hate to.
It's
It's
in
in
our
our
sphere of influence. And
Was there
so
a
that-
reason that we have not annexed this?
No, actually, it's because you need the property owner's consent, and I doubt that the property owner would consent until he sees
Well,
the
I'd like to
general
be
plan.
right here. What's your opinion about that? You don't have to have one if you don't. I mean, that's fine.
Well, we think that logically, at the end of the day, the property belongs in the city of Newport Beach, but we also want to make sure we understand what the runway looks like as we approach a landing.
So you want to go down two paths?
87% of the land presently is in the county right now.
All right.
And, we have in good faith engaged staff in the city and the members of the community and the committees to dialogue during this general plan update, and we are desirous of maintaining good relations there. And we would look forward to that process being a two-way street.
Mr. Mayor? Go ahead, Mr. Webb.
The chart in our discussion indicates areas of potential environmental impact, and you have an area ranked 1, 2, and 3. I assume that 3 is the 118 acres, and that's one that doesn't require any resource agency approval for vegetation. I'm a little confused. What acreage is involved with the area that would be potentially up for development?
On the chart on the next page, on the figure that shows the environmental constraints following that page, following page 29, you'll see there's also a reference on the bottom to total buildable area of about 216 acres.
Okay.
This was and this is before my experience with the agencies is this is a very first pass. It doesn't reflect the negotiation with the Army Corps, the wetlands permitting, et cetera. My guess is that number probably would be smaller, just based upon having worked with those agencies in the past. But this is a first pass guesstimate based upon some scientific research.
Okay, so we're looking at a total acreage out there of about 518 acres. If you look at that map, the green area and the pink area are going to be habitat value areas that maybe some portions of them can be mitigated, but maybe not. The orange area or the bluff area.
That's correct.
And so you're really looking at the developable areas as being the areas inside the orange and red area. The yellow area is a fault zone.
That's correct.
So, but that's just something you just have to design around.
Right.
But your 218 acres would be then inside really the orange and the red envelope.
The areas
sort of.
without color.
The areas without
The areas
color.
without color, okay. That's right, you do have a lower area there, don't you, that potentially could, okay. So we have, I don't understand the chart that is in the discussion then, why that is even there. It really confuses the whole process.
We can modify the chart to make sure it reflects the graphic.
The map and the chart somewhere or another need to, either you refer to a map that says these are the 1, 2, 3 areas, or you go back to the map and put a chart together that agrees. I think that would help us.
It's probably worth mentioning the green areas on that map are already in public ownership with the core, with the restored
So,
wetland areas.
and that's that's your
Outside,
518 acres because it's in the zone,
Right.
but not necessarily under the ownership, and perhaps that should be separately designated so that we take that out of the, since it's already gone, that we take it out of the area in play. Does that make sense, maybe?
Well,
What's the rest of the council think? Mr. Ridgway?
It's okay, but there's somewhere, and I have a vague memory of this because I read it, where they talk about what percentage of the land is developed, and if you're taking out, I just think you have to be careful. If you take out this Army Corps of Engineer properties, all of a sudden your designated acreage has now been reduced by sleight of hand here, and I don't want that to happen. So I guess, we're all kind of in agreement here.
I'll go sit down.
Well, we're all kind of in agreement, but I think, Woody, we need, there's a lot more work to be done here. Is that probably?
These
Sure.
red areas,
And-
are you conceding the red areas?
No, we're recognizing that those have significant environmental constraints. Virtually all of the property right now is heavily encumbered with oil operations. And so part of our proposal will be to unlock that existing use from the vast majority of the site and cause a transformation with some development, but lots of open space. We recognize that there will be substantial open space associated with the project.
Good. All right.
Thank you.
Mr.
But
Massey?
the time limit, you'd like that just removed, right? I mean, as far as...
I'd like to, we've recognized it as an issue. I think staff has recognized it, and we would be committed to continue to work with staff and all of the stakeholders.
But you're
Come up
not
with
looking at a 20-year time under any...
That would not be our first choice.
I would just
It would be
suggest
right
we
on the
leave that out for now and just leave the language as is, and then you continue to work with staff.
That would be fine with us.
With the understanding that the primary use, along with that primary use, doesn't have any specific period of time to it. In other words, we take that number out, but we don't want to guarantee or promise anybody that it's going to be a primary use of open space for a extended period of time.
Yeah, you need to have the right to move on it in a year.
We
The
would
way
be
I see
hopeful
it.
that there wouldn't be essentially a moratorium on us proceeding with our property, but we would always have an open ear and
There you go.
Certainly would consider reasonable offers, but we're skeptical, but nonetheless committed to work.
Personally, I just assume that the placeholder be left in there. The Planning Commission thought it was important. I don't think we're filling in a date today. We'll definitely need to be addressing it again at some
Right.
point.
Yeah.
And although I'm sure George and his folks would like to start turning dirt there tomorrow, realistically, no matter what they do, even if we approved 10,000 units on that property, that's not going to happen. So I think the developer understands that there's a certain time frame here where they're going to need to seek approvals.
Clearly.
It'll be a number of years before we see any kind of development on that property. And so with that recognition, I think they understand that there may be a window here where others can come in that would like to preserve the property as open space and make an attempt at satisfying them as to their investment returns or whatever they need to justify selling the property at a given price. And so I just assume just leave it in for the time being.
Was it blank?
Yeah, with a blank.
That's fine.
Just one question. These red areas, they are developable, so is what I'm... I mean, they're dry land right now. They're not...
Well, portions of them down on the upper
bottom.
left, this area right here.
Right, the big area. Yeah.
Is in a lowland area, but it's crisscrossed with roads that are not wetlands. But it would be
Don't they call it a degraded wetlands
significantly
area?
degraded wetland areas, and that would also be an element of the planning process to work on.
And there were also species of wildlife and plants found in this area. Broken up, they're degraded, and they've been impacted, but they're also on list of threatened and endangered species.
Is there any area, because we're doing our general plan, where we have any leverage? Shouldn't use that term. Leverage to have this in the city, so it's not a Newport Coast situation where these entitlements get off-site, then they're annexed in bulk. is this the time to be asking for it? I mean, at this point in time, it's whoever offers the better deal. Do we have any, are we in a position where we have more developable piece of property, whatever, where we would say, play ball with us, and therefore, we really want this thing annexed into the city, rather than to say, okay, you've got all your entitlements in the county, now you're going to, and we'll just have to swallow the whole thing based on county approvals.
That was why staff recommended, and the Planning Commission also recommended, that we go back to the higher development limits, the 1375 residential units and 75,000 square feet for commercial, as opposed to the lower numbers the GPAC had recommended.
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
So instead of a legal approach, more of a sales approach, or creating an incentive.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, as staff already said, the landowner does have to agree to the annexation. And certainly they could forum shop here, even though we surround it with a 1-foot strip. They could go to LAFCO and ask for that to be de-annexed from our city and actually go another route. So the landowner controls more than anything. There's not much we can do about that.
Well, other projects in similar situations, county territory, sphere issues with cities, we have worked, and it would be our preference to work with the city on a pre-annexation agreement basis, where we both negotiate out the appropriate terms and provisions and set the stage for annexation. And I think that's the spirit with the dialogue that we're having right now, and that we hope to continue to build on.
Agreed. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
City Attorney, we've opened it up for one. The owner, is it appropriate we open it up to the balance of the audience, since this is, or not?
You can open it up for public comment anytime before or during the
What do you think's fair?
discussion.
We've let the landowner
When it-
talk about Banning Ranch, which is kind of a, what's the council's?
My suggestion is that on this Banning Ranch subject, before you move on to the next one, that you open it up for public comment.
The Planning Commission opened it for public comment for each district, and that worked well.
Okay, so should we first conclude with the rest of the comments, or has the council concluded with them?
I have a couple comments.
Go ahead, Mr. Webb.
My pet subject is the active community park on the site, and I don't see it mentioned in the discussion leading up to it. It would seem like to me it would be appropriate at the end of the general discussion to indicate that the recreation element shows a deficiency of active park uses in this part of the community, and that it would be proposed that there be an active community park site of, I'm stuck on 20 to 30 acres with night lighting considered. Is that where it is?
On page 33, policy 6.5.2.
Well, I was thinking that to support a policy, it seems like you should have some mention or discussion in your text leading up to it, so that there's some basis to provide the park.
The deficiency is discussed in recreation, so actually there was, while we didn't incorporate this particular comment from the Planning Commission, we do have a note here that the Commission wanted us to reference this back to the fuller discussion in the recreational element to make sure that those linkages are made.
Okay, and would that be in the discussion, or is that just policies?
It would be, we can add that into the policies, I think, which is the appropriate location, because it strengthens the policy.
Okay. So that, of course, I'm hung up on several different areas showing it in the policy. So you're saying that the only place it would be really mentioned as an active park is in page 33 under 6.5.2.
Pretty specific.
And actually, I think that a little bit in the discussion on page 29, that very last paragraph, because if Banning Ranch is developed as a residential community, public input has entered. We can add park to that.
That's where that paragraph, I think it should show, I'd like it to say active community park as opposed to just park.
It also says it in goal 6.3 at the top of page 31. It says active park lines.
Yeah, 6.4.1, this is active park lines. Again, can we slip community park lines in there? There's a difference.
Just
insert a community park, I'm sorry. Community parks under 6.4.1.
6.3, Don?
That would be,
So to serve, as an active community park instead of parklands, or
6 point, at the top, yeah. That's really just your goals, and then so you specify it in more
We'll
detail. So,
insert community whenever we say park.
yeah, parklands, yeah.
Mr.
Yes.
Sharon, what was your comment?
We'll insert community wherever we say park.
I just would like to make a statement. It seems like every time we talk about Banning Ranch, I'm gone. Under 6.3.17, they won't be removed, and because it's just kind of explains, but where it says Banning Ranch, which support the active pursuit of acquisition as a permanent open space, which may be accomplished. And I just want to say I oppose, and I will always oppose, issuance of state bonds for purchase of land within the city of Newport Beach. That's not fair to the citizens of this state. It's inappropriate use. If there's private entities and/or organizations that want to buy it, fine. I just think that's, I just have to say I oppose that statement.
Well, Mr. Ridgway, how's that any different than taking federal money to dredge our bay? I mean, if the money's available to buy open space.
Well, you want me to go into that? Because the Back Bay has been designated under the Clean Water Act 303D as an impaired water body, and they have mandated that we keep the
Right.
we have 4 TMDLs, and so the federal government has mandated, and that's what that's all about. That Back Bay dredge is about what was mandated.
But if there are bonds that are for park, and if we don't, or open space, and we don't take the money, it ends up going to Valencia, and they buy open space, what difference does it make?
Well, I think Amundsen Ranch was an abomination. I think the purchase of that land for those few people out there by the state, I oppose that. I'm just, I'm making a political statement.
Well, the people have made the statement. They okayed the bonds. It's not our choice. The money's available, and they have to, and if the landowner has to agree to it, then it's a bargain between two agencies.
The landowner doesn't care where the money comes from. I care where the money comes from. That's all. I think it's inappropriate for state bonds to be used for these type of purchases.
Okay.
I think that's a wider discussion than what we're looking at here tonight. Why don't we just move on? I have a comment, though, under paragraph, section 6.5.4 at the bottom of page 33. They talk about, does everybody have it?
Right there.
A linear park along the bluffs to preserve the bluffs.
Yes.
I would also, in that last sentence there, it talks about development being set back from the bluff faces along which should be located a linear park to provide public views of the ocean, wetlands, and surrounding open spaces. To that, I would like to add at the end some language as follows, as well as to preserve public views looking up from the ocean, wetlands, and surrounding open spaces. So the consideration being that it's important to protect the views looking down from up on the bluff down to the ocean and the things that you want to look down there, to also protect people's views from down below the bluff, so that when you're looking up, you're not just looking at a wall of homes up there like we see over at Castaways around the bay.
So are you suggesting that if they were developed housing, that it couldn't block a view going upward?
Yeah, I guess. Well, to a certain extent, that the development will need to be set back from the bluff, and that's the reason for the linear park.
You don't get a Castaway view, just a row of white houses at the top of the bluff. So if we set it back far enough to where you would just see.
Well, if you go a mile away, obviously you're going to see a house. But if you're standing at the bottom of the bluff or in a reasonable proximity to it, I don't think most people want to be looking up at a bunch of homes up there, and that the development should be sensitive to the fact that those are natural bluffs, and that it is has scenic and beauty value, and that I think we did our city a disservice when we allowed the homes as close to the bluff up in Castaways, because it ruined what I perceive, or I've always viewed as a very scenic area, and now it's just a bunch of wall of homes at the top of that bluff. think you measure it the same way as you preserving or preserving the public view from the top of the bluff. I mean, it's probably a loose standard, but I think it needs to be considered as part of whatever development project takes place there.
Could the view of the houses be softened by landscaping or something like that? Would that be
Possibly. I mean, it's.
mitigation?
I guess you'd have to. It all depends on how you define view. I would imagine. You know, one man's view is another man's impediment. Palm tree or whatever you want to call it. When people complain about palm trees 2 miles away, that's in their view.
I would ask a question. Do you believe that we should have all the cuts into the bluffs then that go along Newport Heights, that go along Corona del Mar? I mean, all those cuts into the bluffs compared looking up, and we have them all. And
Yeah,
they're now
I do,
being
actually.
put in,
Yes,
too.
I do. I do.
Okay,
actually.
and so basically...
I'm not in favor
you
of
would-
the homes spewing down the bluff in
Okay,
Corona del Mar.
so you would be basically going to vote against those when it comes up? I don't think that's happened.
We're talking about
Banning
Banning
Ranch now. I don't want to get into details of Corona
Yeah,
del
you
Mar.
live under Banning Ranch, that's the difference
I think
here.
there's thousands of Newport Beach residents as well as tens of thousands of visitors to the city that live underneath Banning Ranch.
Mr. Mayor, I mean, Councilmember Daigle said we could straw vote this one. I would just make a comment. I don't know where the developable land is. I think Mr. Rosansky has a point. Certainly the Castaways, aesthetically, it could have been much better. Over in Dover Shores, under the LCP, we have specific setbacks. It's too soon to get into a setback discussion here because this is a general policy document. I think if you leave it for future, I submit to you ultimately when you get to a specific zoning, you could have a setback of 100 feet. You know, it still preserves the view of the homes and at the same time preserves the bluffs and that type of thing.
Right.
I think it's more specific at a later date.
Exactly. I'm not looking to put a number here. I'm just saying that when we address that issue of what the setbacks are going to be, I think that.
Can we use the word considered in there? Let's say show.
Well, I don't. Where do you want to put it? I mean,
As to prefer, and to consider preservation.
Well, I
of
said
public
as well
view.
as preserve. Well, I guess you can call it that. I prefer probably a little stronger statement. I like it the way it was, as well as to preserve the public views. But I would consider, I guess.
It's interesting because we really,
Let's take a stand here, Don.
Castaways really stands out. And those houses are set farther back from the top of the bluff than all of the houses built along Galaxy. The difference is you don't see the ones on the Galaxy right now because they have mature landscaping all along the rear of the properties. And because larger setbacks on the side yards, there's more area that people have developed with landscaping. Castaways is so tight that there isn't room for trees and landscaping. So that's one of the things that if we had a significant landscaping element or requirement on the bluff top houses that could possibly soften. then I
Well,
think that would
knowing what land values are these days and what development direction is taking, I tend to think we're probably more in the Castaways vein than probably Galaxy is, and those are days gone by, and large setbacks and single-story homes and things like that are a thing of the past. So if anything, we're probably looking at more intensive development and probably have more likelihood of a Castaways result than a Galaxy Avenue result.
I just would remind council, whoever's here at that point in time, they'll have. There's going to be more than one opportunity to review the concept here. This just sets a framework for a general discussion, and I'm sure this discussion will be much more specific at a later date. I do agree with you, though. And Mr. Webb, Dover is single story, and the Castaways is two-story, and there is there is no opportunity. There's limited opportunity for landscaping in front of those houses because of that. Yeah, and it's a severe drop-off. But anyhow, enough of that discussion. I think we can move on. I think be my suggestion.
Should we have a straw vote on this inclusion?
Well, what's the
Mr. Mi-
inclusion at this point in time?
Can you read it again?
I just wanted to add it to the end there, as well as to preserve public
What
views.
section, Steve?
At the very end of
Page
6.5.4.
6.4.
Talks about, along which shall be located a linear park to provide public views of the ocean, wetlands, and surrounding open spaces, as well as to preserve public views looking up from the ocean, wetlands, and surrounding open spaces.
To me, that's too vague and too broad. I would just say that because, as Mr. Webb said earlier, at what point where do you stand on up in Huntington Beach and look, and the public views. Well, okay, we're going to do a straw vote.
Excuse me, could I suggest just one addition there, as well as to preserve public views of the bluffs, so that we know what we're protecting?
Yeah.
But I don't think that's not
No.
what you're trying to come up with. He just
No.
doesn't want a hard row of
I don't see them
houses at the
building
top
on the
of
bluff, because I don't think coastal commission will ever let them build on those bluffs, because they're natural landforms to a large degree.
Are
So
you
I'm not so
really-
concerned about the actual bluff. I'm concerned about the view from below, looking up at whatever development is constructed up there.
Are you really looking for a park that you could walk behind the houses? I mean, that's what your linear park kind of concept is?
I guess in my mind, it would be a
mean-
park of some width that runs along the entire bluff, probably similar to what you have in Corona Del Mar, except for the houses that are there, but a bluff-top park, which may or may not have a street that runs along the edge of it, depending on how the
Would
developer wants to develop the property.
Would the people own, let's say, 40 feet back from the bluffs as in Castaways, and that
No,
would be
it would be a
walkable?
public park, right, public open space.
Yeah,
Oh, I'm
they
sorry,
have a
I'm
public
sorry,
walkway.
that's right, public
Well,
access.
something like that, I mean, that has some merit, but as you're moving out, you're going to see a house.
At some point, you will see houses, I agree.
Can
I'm
we
just
take-
saying that we need to preserve a certain amount of setback or requirement that whatever development, and maybe it requires single-story homes in the first row up there. Maybe that's at some point what we would need to do, or have setback requirements that say it's step development so that we don't see homes looming over the bluff. That's my objection.
Okay, can we take a straw vote on this?
Let's have last bite from staff here, please.
I have a suggestion for a new policy, because as I'm listening to this more, I don't think this is so much about the setback from the bluff as it is the design and appearance of the houses. And so perhaps we could have another policy that says site and design development, so that, or site and design development to prevent houses from dominating the public view from the ocean, wetlands, and surrounding open space.
I'd be amenable to that.
Sounds good.
Okay. Who else is in favor of that proposal? We have two.
As written by
By
Sharon,
staff.
I'm
Yeah, I
fine
agree with
with,
Sharon.
I'm fine with that.
We got four. We got two and two more. We got four. Do you have direction?
On that issue,
Okay, now, okay, any
going
other?
back a page,
Okay. Pardon?
I am not sure if there was a resolution on the date in 6.4.1.
No, we left it open.
We left it open. Okay,
But there
let's
will
go,
be
let's
a
go.
by
Just
We
blank.
left it
Hold on.
open for now.
Hold on.
As shown there.
point of
Mr.
clarification.
Nichols.
I'm sorry. So now we're going to have, protect views from the ground up, but not views from the up down.
Both.
In other words, we don't protect public views throughout Corona Del Mar, throughout all of our places. We do not protect public views. You've said that again, and
Private.
again,
Private.
and again, right?
Private views we do not protect.
Oh, private views, excuse me. Is this not protecting private views?
No, this is public.
You
Just-
mean
just
because
the
the
opposite.
public can be down below and look up?
That's right.
Why can't the public be up and look down?
The policy already provides for that, as written.
Okay. Mr. Selich.
Yeah, before we officially accept this 1375 units, I'd just like to hear from GPAC on what their rationale was for the 875 units and the
But the number that you folks selected was just an arbitrary number, wasn't it? Just half of what the Taylor Woodrow plan was? There was no science involved in it other than half of the Taylor Woodrow plan. Okay.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at.
Well, do we need to take a straw vote on that?
Thought you already did.
No, I thought you already did, but I just want to understand, get out what their rationale was, so that at least we understood it before we, moved on this issue.
Okay. Any other comment before we open up to the public? Sharon, are you clear on direction from us?
Yes.
Not that the public will not sway us. Okay, should we open up to the public? If you want to speak on Banning Ranch, now's the time. No one. Okay, closed.
Move on.
Sharon Wood?
Okay, well, I have one other question I want to ask, and that is, in all the other planning areas, we've got designations that relate to our general plan categories. This is the only area where we have a map that has all of these constraints on it. What are we going to be showing in our land use diagram if we go ahead with and adopt the general plan the way we're going right now?
You'll have two designations. You'll have OS, which is open space / RV for residential village, which is one of the categories specified in Table 1.
And that's going to be over the entire property?
That'll pertain to the entire property, yes, sir.
Even though I don't think in anyone's wildest dreams that
it will not apply.
That anything below the bluff is ever going to be developed?
It will not apply, because that area will be subject to the actual negotiations with the Army Corps of Engineers, et cetera. But what we would delete is the area that is the restored wetland, because that will be designated only as open space, because it will not be consideration as a part of the negotiation, I'm sure. So the green area on the figure will be deleted.
I don't think they own the green area, do they?
Sorry?
They don't own the green area.
No, that's why it
anyway.
will be designated separately.
Okay, so the green area is going to be open space, then the rest of it will have the dual designation on it?
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, any other comment before we leave the ranch?
One question.
Yes, Ms. Nichols.
The green area has to be purchased then. It has not been purchased. It's just been made wetlands?
The Army Corps owns it.
It's owned by the Army Corps.
Okay, so that's different. They already own that.
That's correct, sir.
Okay. Now, can that serve as mitigation for the whole property?
No, that was mitigation for Santa Ana River project. That's the reason why they purchased it. So it's already been used as mitigation.
Oh, no, but I think Mr. Nichols is saying, because the landowner gave this up or sold it to the Corps of Engineers, do they get credit for it as open space on future development? Wasn't that your question? Yes.
Because the Corps of Engineers bought it.
I understand. I mean,
mitigation.
but that was Mr. Nichols' question. The other way, do they get future credit for something they've already conveyed? No. Okay, we're clear on that. Okay. We off the ranch? Okay.
Greg, can you do the honors of taking the... I'm sorry. The next area, beginning on page 34 and running through the top of page 7, is the West Newport Mesa area. This used to be called the West Newport Industrial Area. And I'll just basically, I'm not going to go through this in detail because of time, remind us that this is adjacent to Hoag Hospital, which is shown here. It basically provides for the opportunities for medical office, for a series of commercial nodes, for residential in an area that is primarily residential and mobile home parks, though there are some small parcels currently developed with non-residential uses for which applications have been considered for change to residential. And the northern portion, basically parcels flanking Production Avenue and north, adjacent to Costa Mesa, being designated for light industrial. Should also let you know that the areas north into Costa Mesa on the city's current thinking about the west side industrial area are intended to be retained for light industrial uses. So there will be a consistency with those uses. Looking at the policies on page 6.6.5, the recommendation there, let me first acquaint you with that particular policy and the intent. The GPAC, as you will see in the language, provided the opportunity for those precise boundaries separating the residential and the medical and commercial uses to be varied under a planning process to allow for someone to acquire properties and develop a more integrated, cohesive plan that integrates the uses into a cohesive district, and et cetera. The Planning
Can I-
Commission suggested changing one word.
Can I interrupt you, City Attorney? I own property that abuts this area. Am I precluded from being here?
In Costa Mesa.
In Costa Mesa, but it abuts it. It's adjacent property.
No.
Good, go ahead.
The Planning
Thank you.
Commission made one recommended change to this, while the GPAC recommended the mechanism to vary the boundaries to be something they called a master plan. The Planning Commission recommended that the planning or regulatory document would be formalized as a specific plan under state planning law, as giving that the greater level of detail regarding the site. Other than that...
Those changes could be done without going back and amending the general plan?
Yes, absolutely. And that's the purpose of adding this policy in here, is to allow it to occur under the guise of the general plan, providing a little more flexibility. The only other change that the GPAC made is near the end on policy 67.2, and this was a GPAC, not a Planning Commission change, was to provide incentives for marine-based uses to locate into this industrial area rather than moving outside of the city as the land values increase in some of the other areas, and the uses may change based upon, again, the decisions on land use for other areas that may be on the harbor front as well. So,
The word master plan indicates then it can be changed without changing this general plan?
that's correct, sir.
Okay.
Or a specific plan does too.
Which is,
Well, the commission recommended a specific plan because there is state statute regarding the content of specific plans.
Woody, that language just sounds a little strange to me. Encourage and provide incentives. I mean, if you're providing incentives, then you're not encouraging. Are you encouraging the users to take advantage of incentives? Or that wording just leaves a little to be desired.
The original version, or one of the versions of this, also then referenced the economic strategic plan, which has not been formalized yet, which the council will be seeing in January, I believe, or et cetera. But basically, it's going to define specific incentives for lot consolidation and business retention, et cetera. The committee deleted it from this because they haven't seen it yet, and they were uncomfortable with adding that reference as well.
Can you focus on 6.6.3, the mobile home parks? And that is to encourage the preservation of them? That's what this is, encourage the conservation enhancement as an affordable workforce. I assume that there's some over there, I know.
There's quite a few.
Well, how do you do that without telling them they can't redevelop it? Because obviously the land values over there are pretty high, and they're going to get higher as Costa Mesa has their overlay come into play. Whose idea was this? And what's the background of it? Because you're basically not down zoning, but you're going to an old-fashioned form of housing rather than the more modern multi-use. I mean over on 15th Street, the high density type.
Well, it's totally inconsistent with previous law or previous practice here 25 years ago, where mobile home parks were in suburban areas an interim use, and now all of a sudden you're kind of saying keep them. You're encouraging keeping them, but that you're precluding something that we may want there. I think the entire policy just needs to be removed.
For consistency with what you did in earlier sections in the housing, when we talked about housing on a citywide basis, it would be consistent probably to delete this policy.
Yeah, I think so. I certainly would encourage. I support that. It makes no sense.
Yes, sir. On page 35, third of the way down.
Didn't we have a policy on mobile homes that we left in here, though, before? I was trying to find it, and I can't find it.
We deleted it, I believe, and I'll go back and check here.
On the West Newport side?
I thought we changed some language in a mobile home policy.
Yeah,
or something.
we're actually precluding ourselves from maybe much better affordable housing. I'm very troubled by this whole concept.
On page 27, actually, you did keep it. If you look at policy 6.2.8,
Yeah, that's it.
you did talk about encourage the maintenance and preservation of existing high-quality and safe mobile home housing and encourage the revitalization of mobile home parks in need of substantial rehabilitation. That was the way the policy was worded. You know, it probably would not be, if you deleted it from this section and you had this as an overarching policy, you probably don't need it even in this section for consistency.
But I'm trying to go, what is the logic behind this?
Can I point out
Go ahead.
another, the one, as long as they're a mobile home park, there really is not much the city can do, because the state has total control over the design and lot lines.
No, I understand
and
that,
what the mobile homes
but-
look like, and
but-
so encouraging better design or encouraging improved mobile home parks will be great, except for whatever they decide to do, the city wouldn't have any ability to control it.
I'd make the comment on page 27, I'd remove that one too. I just don't see any reason for it. And Robin's right, we're totally preempted. And if we wanted to do nice design, I mean, look what they did out here on Lido Peninsula. We had no control over that. We would have never approved that project.
GPAC had recommended deleting that policy on page 27. Planning Commission restored it, and the City Council added the word existing.
I just think it's a land use from the past.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that they're modern, and we've gone beyond just single-family residential on this type of these tracks. It's usually higher density projects, and it usually provides a modest, we can use that term in this community, priced housing.
Well,
Mr. Rosansky.
does any of the language prevent a mobile home park owner from redeveloping the park, not as mobile homes, but as high-density residential or whatever
No, there's
zoning we're going to...
No, there isn't. There's just the state law requirements for closing a park.
Right,
For redevelopment, they
but-
have to follow that
But
anyway.
because we put these goals or this language in here, I mean, personally, and probably the people, most of the residents in my district would probably just as soon see the mobile home parks go, because they do probably perceive it as a lesser use. But, I mean, it's not going to, I think we already have noticed that one of those parks is closing. The owner has notified us, and have not told us what their intent is, but I'm assuming it is for some type of high-density residential development somewhere down the road.
Well, policy 6.6.3, the one on page 35 with regard to West Newport Mesa, does say encourage the conservation of existing mobile home parks. So that's telling us we should try to
Nancy,
keep
maybe
them.
you can tell us why GPAC thought it should be put back in.
No, they deleted.
Oh, you deleted it?
They deleted it.
Well, then take it out. It's
All right,
gone.
let's have a straw vote. Should it come out in both places?
Yes.
Do we want modular housing, though? Would
No.
we put that in? Would that be something that we
No, it's
like,
in
or we want to get
There
rid
is
of it?
There is a
policy
separate
on that.
policy on modular housing.
There is a separate?
Yes, on page 27, 6.2.9.
Do we have any issues with affordable housing requirements and things like that by not addressing mobile home housing as one of the options in our city?
And I don't believe that in our housing elements, it's been identified. Have any of our mobile home parks been identified as affordable housing in the city? I don't
No.
think they
No,
are.
because we don't
So,
know.
No, and
no.
that's what was troubling to me too, is inconsistent.
All right, then I
All right, we
move
have-
or vote for deletion of
Both places?
6.2.8 as
This
well as
manufactured
6.6.
housing sort of,
Well, we're not on manufacturing.
Well,
Let's stick to mobile for right now.
Well, I'm in support of deleting the mobile home
Yeah.
statements, not only in these two instances, but if they're in any of the other areas, that we just take them out altogether and just remain silent on it. I mean, the state has totally preempted us on this issue, and there's really no reason for us to even address it.
So that's 3.
I agree with that.
All right, we got 4. That's my penny contribution to this whole general plan. So, all right, what's next?
Okay, nothing else on
we're deleting both
I've got a question on 6.6.4. How did, or anybody, GPAC or the staff, how was 5 stories determined? Why wasn't it 4 or 6 stories? No, this is on building height and mass. It's on page 35, policy 6.6.4. And it's medical-related and residential buildings be a maximum height of 5 stories.
It's higher, it would be a higher building. The intent here was that this was an area, and we heard this in the visioning process, that you're not abutting single-family residential, so the idea here was to provide some height options that would increase ground-level open space, in effect, by instead of having everything pushed down within the densities of being low, squat buildings, to provide the opportunity for some height. To answer the question of why it's not 6 or why it's not 4, I don't think I can give you a scientific or even a sane answer in that respect. But
It was 5 o'clock in the evening when they voted.
The idea was, though, for some variable, and five is fairly common for some of the higher densities that we've been looking at, and I think that was some rationale for the thinking of it as well. And again, the idea is not intended to increase the densities beyond the densities are specified here, but it's intended to create more flexibility in height. You may have 2-, 3-story buildings somewhere, 5-story elsewhere in some variation, and then additional open space that is achieved by that at the ground level.
Rather than go to stories, shouldn't we have some sort of maximum height limit?
You're saying in terms of feet?
In terms of feet, because, I don't know, does that make?
We can transfer that.
Yeah, that would be,
Do that in the zoning ordinance, though.
We can do that in the zoning ordinance.
but perhaps here in the general plan, we shouldn't have the number of stories either, but say something like consider increasing the height limit.
I would feel more comfortable with that so that we don't get a very creative architect like we have had in many places in the city that creates a 5-story equivalent to a 10-story building or whatever. That's an exaggeration, but I think that we could get in trouble just with stories.
Well,
Oh, I'm fine with it the way that it is. I was just wondering what the rationale was. I mean, I didn't mean to.
All right, well, let's have a straw vote on what Mr. Webb proposes. Do you want a height limit?
I would propose that, what was that word that you used, Sharon? It was
Consider increasing the height limit for medical-related and residential buildings within the prescribed intensity and density limitations. Next sentence says it.
But I would accept that and that way it doesn't tie us into any particular height or stories, and in the future it allows us to perhaps look at it through the zoning code regulations in the area.
All right, that's one.
Just a question.
Oh.
Do we want, I see office buildings and medical buildings make sense a little bit higher, but as you go up in stories, particularly on residential, there is a very, very big chance that you're going to create problems. The 5-story buildings back east that were built into any kind of projects have generally been torn down or been condemned or are presently just plain slums. And I don't think you want that. It seems to me if you're going to do residential, maybe a 4-story limit or something like that, and unless it's a special place like a hotel or something, and your medical related allow that to go higher, like you have in Fashion Island. I mean, Fashion Island has, I think those are 10-story buildings, but I'm not sure, or 7 or 8 at least. They're 80,000 square feet apiece. Do you know, Sharon, how tall they are?
No, I'll tell you after my dental appointment tomorrow.
I think I'm about the same. I think they're about 10 stories.
Without agonizing, I support Sharon's comment because she standardized it by saying within the prescribed limits of our zoning code. It's that simple.
All right, we have 3 for that.
So, you agree with that, Al?
likes it like it is.
You like specificity.
Yeah, I'm sorry I brought it up.
How about you?
I'll go with what the staff has recommended. So there's 4.
That's 4 votes. Let's go.
Consider increasing the height.
Any other council comment on West Newport Mesa? All right. I'm going to open that up to public comment. Here to talk about West Newport Mesa, that section of this agenda tonight. Okay, seeing none, we'll move to the next area.
Okay, the next area is going to be a little complex here, and I may need the lights. And I'm going to take this is going to be the Balboa Peninsula area, which includes a number of sub-areas. As an overview, beginning on page 39 to the middle of page 40, there are some area-wide policies dealing with the overall differentiation of the districts and the relationship to marine-related uses themselves. It then breaks down the policies for each of the sub-areas. What I want to point out to you, so I don't belabor this, is really the differences that the GPAC had from the City Council and where the Planning Commission made on that. So I'm going to start with Lido. Could I possibly on this one, because this is very tough to read. You have this figure in there. And actually, Greg, I'm sorry, can you put your hand over the other or something over it because it's not helping there? Or could you throw your body in front of it or something? Thanks. It's going to burn. Yeah, it's going to burn your hand there. The Lido Village area, and I'll relatively brief here. This was an area for which you had originally recommended for the environmental consideration, the possibility of mixed-use development along with the visitors serving, the marine-related uses, et cetera. The advisory committee, the GPAC, recommended that only that no housing would be submitted or considered within this area, and that the only site, which you can barely see, the sub-area C, which is behind the market, Civic Center being here, that only that would be the only area in which mixed use would be permitted. Again, your original recommendation was for mixed use throughout this area. The Planning Commission this afternoon supported your original recommendation for mixed use in the entirety of the area, so they would not limit the housing to only this one smaller area here as well. So they supported that original recommendation. The other technical change they made is in this area they would also allow office on the ground floor of a mixed-use building. So what I'll do is end it there in terms of the overall Cannery Village, the basic recommendations for mixed use for either residential at the ground floor or mixed use in here or at intersections was maintained. The recommendation for McFadden Square for mixed use was maintained. The recommendation for waterfront uses and mixed use along the water channel here was maintained. So the only real deviation that the GPAC made was in this one area, and again, in summary, the Planning Commission went back to your original recommendation.
Okay, council comment on that?
Could we get GPAC's thoughts on why they went back to residential related than stubborn? Okay.
I'll just start off. I think the comments made by Planning Commission today are very appropriate. Unfortunately for me, it's an area and a site that I've worked for 7 years as a councilman and 6 years as a planning commissioner, and I really support the integration of mixed use. It just makes more sense. I don't know what it's going to end up. I think the planners here, staff, myself have seen so many varied plans, and I just wouldn't want to preclude any creative plan that would regenerate the use here and viability, economic viability. I will say all plans were commercial on the ground floor. I've never seen a plan that didn't have some component of commercial on the ground floor, but I think the mixed use, I just want to say that makes the most sense. And for the entire area, I know this area very well. I walk it, I ride it. I mean, I didn't see many changes at all. As long as the whole concept of integrated mixed use is just something that needs to be maintained.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Webb.
Question to staff. In a all-commercial area versus a mixed-use area, would a mixed-use area have the potential for requirements for more open space or park uses than a commercial area? To where with mixed use, you might get more openings than with just plain commercial?
The residential portion of a mixed-use structure has a different design configuration than a 100% commercial. Daylighting for residential units, because of the size of the residential units, requires additional kind of configuration and modulation and cutouts, if you will, of the building form to create access for that. There are also requirements, and you may recall when we talked about the airport area, for an on-site recreational requirement, a certain square footage, which we used and defaulted to the numbers from the Platinum Triangle in Anaheim in terms of that additional square footage, plus all of the housing would have to contribute to a fees to meet the park requirements according to when we looked at the recreational element of the acreage of parkland. So you have to provide the on-site recreational green element plus the contribution to the fees as a part of this as well. So the short answer is there are requirements for on-site or contribution of fees to provide additional green space that would be required as part of this.
Okay, I guess that what I'm trying to bring out here is that there seems to be a concern with some of the GPAC members related to the mixed uses being more dense and having more blockage of access to the water than commercial uses. And as I look at Lido Village today, yes, there's a narrow pathway that you can walk along there, but you couldn't have a more dense blocked off area than what you have there today. So I think that if we provide the guidance for some mixed uses that allow for open space, well, at least provide for some kind of green areas that tie into those uses when we allow residential, that we can end up actually with a much more attractive waterfront area than we could with just all commercial.
There are examples of mixed-use buildings in what I call the colder climates where they have gone to a block. But I'd say in Southern California we've seen to see a reduction of building mass and volume to create the additional open spaces and linkages as well. And I do believe we have some of that in different policies on mixed-use areas.
Yes, Mr. Rosansky?
Yeah, I have a comment on one of these areas here, Area D, which I believe is the Albertsons Shopping Center right now. The grocery stores are a scarce commodity in that area, and there's really only the two, the Vaughn's Pavilion and the Albertsons. I'd hate to see that property change to some type of residential use that would preclude the grocery store. And I think in order to have a vibrant community, whether it's mixed use or residential or whatever you're going to have, you have to have certain necessary facilities. I think that was one of the reasons why we preserved the 75,000 square feet up in the Banning Ranch, is because we said a 35,000 square foot retail center didn't make sense because you couldn't have a supermarket in the center, and you're going to create all these other residential units, and people are not going to have a good place to go to shop or find the types of services that they would want close by, and prevent long trips up to Costa Mesa, which are the next supermarkets up really from here. So I would really like to see that property stay just a general retail designation that would preserve the existing
neighborhood commercial.
Use, as opposed to allowing mixed use on that property.
telling you, I support that, although Albertsons is for sale.
The chain is, but
The
that
chain
doesn't
is.
mean that it's not going to be a
I know, but
supermarket.
this was Lucky's, and prior to that, I think it was something else.
Yeah.
Market Basket. It could have been a Market Basket, and then it's gone to Lucky's and Albertsons and something else. Yeah, I have a concern that about competition, and you know, and I know. So I support that.
But not a mixed use with a grocery store on the bottom and residential on top?
I don't see that. You know,
It's
boy,
not-
I've only seen that in a couple of places, and
Well, it just so happens that the neighbor perpendicular to my house controls this asset, and that's exactly what he has in mind for it, is maintaining the grocery store component with residential on top. But you live, but this is your district.
Right.
If you want to make it, solely a retail site, then
well,
that's the issue.
the problem. I mean, that's what I do for a living. The problem in the few, and I've gone out and visited the residential over markets. Ralph's has allowed that to happen a couple of times. You get a huge massing of building. And I would just say, generally, I don't think we would be supportive, especially here, it's between Newport Boulevard and Balboa Boulevard. Do we want to see a huge massing? And to be honest with you, I personally don't. I don't want to design it, and I hate like heck to take away. But on this one, I think the single-story lower intensity and maintaining pure commercial use is appropriate. So I will support just leaving it commercial neighborhood.
Well, and you also may not have a grocery store anywhere because of the value of the land as because you've created this commercial concentration that you may not have a grocery store. They will not be able to pay those higher rents, and you may not have your grocery store anywhere. You may have retail or commercial, but you may not have grocery because they're not going to be able to pay those high rents. And more importantly, the developer may not need the grocery store as a link, as a draw to the site because it's so valuable.
Well, I would just say generally, though, the massing will be different. It won't be a two-story, very busy. This is a very busy intersection, by the way. I just got to tell you, 32nd and Newport and Balboa, it's extremely busy. So to add the component of mixed use at that intersection is problematic at best, even if we allowed it. But you know, and just generally, we're over commercial on the peninsula. I tell you, they need a market. They being the landowner, and we as landowners need the market. So, I mean, we as residents need the market. We certainly need the competition. Last thing I want to see is pavilions being the only market on the peninsula, because that's what we're setting ourselves up for.
There's just not large pieces of land where you're going to develop another supermarket anywhere near there, other than the Banning Ranch. So,
What was the staff rationale for mixed use in that?
Well, we started considering it because a potential developer had come in and asked about it, so we kind of broadened the study area. And I think that we were thinking that perhaps that market would go away. That corridor along 32nd Street as kind of being a walk to the beach might be a good area for mixed use so that people would have shops along the way.
well, personally, I think as a city, we should encourage anything we can to keep the market there, not to set up an easier path for the market to leave.
Can we create an M classification? Market.
Yeah, well, I'll support that change.
All right, we have 1, 2, 3, 4.
So what are you going to call that then? It's not D anymore, it's H?
CN designation, which will be a neighborhood commercial.
Just commercial neighborhood. It's still built area D. It's just commercial neighborhood.
That's correct.
You just take away the integrated mixed use.
Just a question. If we were to rezone our own property there, what would you consider as an underlying?
Well, as I said, there's mixed use. I think I'd probably designate it City Hall. With a parking structure and fire station.
Civic Center.
I'll second that motion.
But it has to be pedestrian oriented, by the way.
How about can we have a shopping retail, a grocery store component to that?
Yeah, we can have a
You
7-Eleven
ever seen any
in the
city
middle
halls
of
over
it.
at groceries?
Yeah, we have let's get on. We're going to be here all night.
Can we go back to what GPAC recommended and how that might differ, not on this property, but on C or on any of the others?
It's all the same.
I'm
So
sorry.
we're following the GPAC recommendation
For,
for the C?
yes, they and the planning commission were consistent on all the surrounding areas.
Okay. We done with city council comment? All right, Balboa Peninsula opened, yes, open for public comment. Balboa Peninsula. Okay.
Let
close
me
it.
ask just one.
Go ahead.
Coming
Mr.
back to this, if we're going to do an adequate commercial trade-off on land and where the city hall is going, if we were to designate some property rights there, as they have under the schools and so forth, you have some bases for making a judgment decision if the city hall were to be moved.
Well, let's wait a couple of months. Maybe we can revisit it. Yeah, it's way too early.
Well, I pose this question, Mr. Selich. Is it too early? Because if you're going to look at alternative sites and you have no designation for this, which means that any use would have to, have to go to a green light vote or something of that nature if you have no designation? What does that mean?
No,
It's not that it doesn't
we
have
could
any-
add a designation before the element is adopted.
But my point is, we have a site committee that's going to be doing this before this all comes back. And if you look at this and say this has no designation, then then when you're looking at alternative sites, does it mean it has no value? I mean, how do you come up with a comparative value that you could sell this site for if you move somewhere else, if you move the city hall site somewhere else, if it's just a white blank? Is this the time to address it or not?
Does it have no designation, or it's just not in the area of special study that?
On the current general plan, it's designated, I believe, as public. Is that correct?
Government education institution.
Yeah, that's the designation. It's just that that's not in the area of.
Well, no, but the point is that has no commercial value other than for government educational, right? It could be what, a public school or a government building or a church. Well, that probably knocks value
Art
down
museum?
a notch. All right.
Better than the city hall.
Well, my point is we're going to have two things happening at once, and if you're saying that this can only be its current designation, what does that do as comparative value if you didn't use it for a government facility?
Well, if the council wants to, I would think that the choices would be what surrounds it, either more of the neighborhood commercial or more of the mixed use that we're showing in the areas.
Or housing, as we've got C.
Mr. Selich wants to weigh in on this.
Well, I think it's premature to do anything with it. If the site committee that's going to be looking at this has to make some determination of value on the property, they would simply have to make an assumption on it. But I wouldn't even begin to start being able to have any rational way of determining right now what you would designate that property for.
Well, it's
I just think it's premature to deal with it right now.
But it's surrounded by everything else. It's not going to be M1. It's not going to be heavy manufacturing. Isn't it surrounded by similarly coded and colored?
Well, the way we're doing it,
zones?
looks like it's surrounded by all mixed use, pretty
Look.
much, or neighborhood commercial.
Well, that's my point. They should have some assumption, to be fair to the committee, what it might be designated for. And we can come back and address it, but they should be given some guidance rather than just governmental education or church.
One of the things that we can put together in our definitions of the committee's evaluation.
Good, that's
is
fine.
That the site can be considered for blank uses, which is probably in this
That's
case,
fine.
neighborhood commercial or mixed use. And handle it that way, and then.
Well, that's fine. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
But if you,
that'd probably be a better way to do it in whatever the parameters of the committee is, rather than
Charge
doing it
of
in this
committee.
document.
oh no, that's fine. That's all I'm just saying that, but you don't want to handcuff the site committee by saying you can't leave the site because it has no value except for government, educational, or a church, because that's not appropriate, because it's fairly, it could have a similar color coding as the surrounding properties. All right, then we'll let the committee deal with it. Okay, we'll leave it blank for now. Okay? I've opened and closed public comment on the peninsula, so
The next
area, please.
area is Balboa Village, beginning in the middle of page 43 and running to the top of page 45. Just a comment here. The original recommendation of the, when we talked about evaluation for the EIR, was to consider mixed use within the entirety of the area, with an emphasis of water-related, marine-related uses, harbor-related uses along the frontage, with the opportunity for housing, of course, and mixed use within the area on top of the buildings as well. The advisory committee recommended that in sub-area A that housing not be included, mixed use not be included, but default to the other visitor-serving uses and the other retail uses that would be permitted within that area. Today, as the Planning Commission considered this area, it recommended and supported the recommendation of the GPAC to limit this to those types of uses and not allow housing here. They did make one change in the what we refer to as the core area, or the area shown as B, or the parcels flanking Balboa Boulevard, was to also allow to create a mixed-use classification that would also allow office on the ground floor, so it could be either retail or office on the ground floor. So it changed the land use classification from MUA1 to MUA2 was their recommendation as well. They also made some boundary adjustments to define the waterfront area, and basically pulled the boundary back here into this area. If you follow the what I'm pointing to in this area, which is
Main Street and Bay Avenue, so the east side of Main Street would be part of
so all of this area
the
here
commercial
would be
area.
part of B, sub-area B. So they just made a mapping change in that area.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
This is a question for Patty. Doesn't our LCP in this area and the Coastal Commission requirements restrict us from any office use in that core area? Wasn't that one of the restrictions? It's not working.
They did place statements within the text that indicated that there was a high preference for visitor-serving commercial in the commercial components of the mixed-use area. However, they also added a policy that set a limited list series of restrictions on what could not go into the visitor-serving commercial areas, and office was not on that list.
Are you sure? Because I thought that was one of them.
No, some
okay.
specific forms of office were prohibited, but it wasn't just offices generally, and there are offices that can serve visitors and residents in this kind of context.
Mr. Ridgway?
Yeah, tell me again on Area A, commercial, any use other than residential is what?
Yeah, the committee, both the GPAC and the Planning Commission supported the notion of the visitor-serving uses, the retail uses, marine-related uses, et cetera, but did not support mixed use.
Okay. Well, my problem is, again, this is, and planning director knows, I've been working this area for, again, equally long, but certainly 7+ years. And I can assure you, I have no problem from, and I'm going to get my directions here, Palm Avenue and going toward the Pavilion building, maintaining that designation. But from Palm Avenue west, there's an entire block there, that has been in disuse, disrepair, and quite candidly, any use. And let me say, I met with, there are a couple of owners there, and I've been meeting with them for off and on for months, and we have to maintain, we must maintain, if we're going to get anything done, a mixed use in that area. Otherwise, we're destined to have what is basically a boarded up project. It's just, it's caught up in lawsuits and claims, and it's tied up for 50 years, unfortunately. It's actually maybe just short of 50 years. So
Does that building go all the way from Palm back to Adams?
The entire block is, first of all, on Bay, you have the parking structure, which is rarely used. Then you have at the corner the old Emerald Forest, and then you have Newport Landing in there, and then you have some mixed ownership in there. My only comment, if we're going to encourage anything, we're going to have to allow integrated mixed use in there. The ground floor,
I would tend to agree with you on that, and the solution might be just to do what the Planning Commission did, and that's change the boundary of Area B and let it move out into the waterfront in that one block area.
Yeah, and that's my suggestion. And I can't say enough that we're creating a situation here where nothing will happen for years. And it's so complex, it's not worth discussion, other than we need to change that boundary and encourage mixed use on that property.
I would support that as well.
That's 3. That's 4.
Thank you.
Mr. Nichols?
Just had a question. Where the A is where the museum is considering.
Correct.
Okay.
That fits. That fits.
So it fits in there in your...
It's fine.
Now that would, supposing it keeps some of its entertainment value type stuff in there, that fits still, right? Okay.
And they will maintain.
Well, I think there's some benefit in having that. I do.
Yeah.
Why don't we show the pavilion kind of going out a little bit on the end of the street there? Because it makes some sense. I mean, it actually does encroach into the waterways, does it not?
Yeah, we show the ferry landing. I think that's a good observation. The ferry landing is shown, so I guess the pavilion building, which has been there since 1905, we probably should just draw in a little...
The square out there
Yeah.
is all I'm saying.
I think that would be
We'll
better.
work with the
Yeah,
city's GIS folks who provide
yeah.
us the maps.
And
make
redo
sure
that line on
it's
Palm
covered.
Avenue to the,
Yes.
I think that's west at that direction. I'm not
But
sure.
you would be talking about, but the restaurant on the, I forgot the name of it. I ate there last night. I'm talking about the other one he owns. The
Newport Landing?
Newport Landing. Don't ask me why I can't remember that.
Why can't you remember that?
I guess I'm getting too old. Anyway, Newport Landing, it seems to be quite viable still, as far as I can tell. Or are you indicating that he may just stick with Harborside?
Without divulging confidences, we need to do what we're doing, Dick.
Okay. I'll let.
Okay. Any other comment? From council? Nope. We done with that section?
So that would be just drawn over there white, in other words, the white would be carried out to the.
The B goes over to everything on this side of Palm.
Okay.
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 That, oh, wait,
Newport Center.
wait.
I'm sorry. Oh, public comment.
I know. Try to, it's like a horse. All right. Public comment on Balboa Village? Open? Closed. All right, Woody?
Okay,
You're on.
thank you. Rushing on to Newport Center, Fashion Island. Before we go into the policies and the changes from the commission, let me indicate that there was a change in the boundary map. If you look at this map, you will see the core area, of course, Fashion Island being designated a regional commercial center. The area then took the western parcels and blocks and designated those for a mixed-use category, which allowed the additional hotels, housing, et cetera, that have been described in the policies. The consideration of the commission was to take blocks 400 and 500, which are, this being 5 and 6, did I say 500 and 600? It's late in the night. Blocks 5 and 6 that are along San Joaquin Hills Road here. There are some surface parking lots in this area. The hotel, what used to be the Four Seasons Hotel, is in this area, et cetera. And to consider these also as opportunities for the housing infill. So the mixed-use designation, which is here, would extend along the northern portion or northeast portion of along Fashion Island as well. The other designations would remain. Now, looking at the policies, Greg, if we could run to those.
That was, excuse me, that was a planning commission's idea?
That was the planning commission's
Today.
recommendation, and also in consideration of input from the Irvine Company, who is represented as here today.
So there'd be no net increase in unit numbers?
Doesn't
It would
change,
just have more latitude?
doesn't change the numbers.
Okay,
The idea, the intent was for the flexibility of
Good.
placement within the site. The policy recommendations, if you look at 614.2, was the discussion about the uses that were permitted in the Newport Center area. Without reading this to you, it did originally stipulate that office development would be limited to the renovation or limited expansion of existing businesses. The intent was not to restrict to an existing business that is there today and might be gone tomorrow, but to really limit it to existing buildings, recognizing that the occupancies or the tenancies of buildings could change over time. So that's more of a technical change rather than a substantive change. Moving ahead on the urban form policies, first addressing the potential location of additional buildings and fronting them onto Newport Center, as well as then policies addressing the pedestrian access connections among the uses within the area, as well as policies addressing the new architectural streetscape improvements within Fashion Island in terms of their complementing existing buildings, et cetera. All of these were changed from require to encourage as a policy direction from the Planning Commission. And there is another, in a technical change which occurs earlier in the document. It was the clarification that the quantities, the capacities for additional retail square footage would still allow the current city's policies and the city's basis for conversion of retail to office would still be in place, except for the additional square footage for retail that the council considered several months ago, the additional 150,000 square feet, 125,000 square feet, that would be strictly restricted to retail uses for, again, the purpose of that anchor store that had been discussed earlier. So the conversion would not apply to that additional increment of growth.
What was the Planning Commission's reason for going from required to encourage in these policies?
And also, if you could address the effect of that, because, and not just here, but wherever we have been changing required to encourage. Does encourage mean that
It's not
nothing?
mandated. It's not required.
So it's just fluff,
It's
really?
discretionary.
It's discretionary.
Woody, Mr. Mayor, I have a question, just a quick one. Throughout the entire document, going to your technical comment about changing business to building, everywhere in the document you use the word housing, and 90% of those probably should be changed to residential.
We can do that.
Okay, just take a look. But the way housing is it's not specific enough. I mean, you leave a lot to be desired throughout the entire document. You'll see what I mean when you start going back.
Well, I support the recommendation of the Planning Commission unless I hear something different in the public comments.
Are you waiting for an answer?
Yeah, I was just
That's fine, that's fine, then you'll have another bite of it.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm remembering more the discussion on 6.14.6, where at first the discussion started with perhaps we should delete the phrase "or higher" with reference to the design quality in existing buildings. And there was concern that how would you define what's equivalent or higher design quality than what's out there now, and the design quality that's there now is fine, and do we need to say higher? And so finally they thought that if we changed require to encourage, then that would take care of that problem.
I don't, the others, was called accepting good faith that they would do it on the basis of the words encouraging.
Yeah, I know Mr. Selich knows this. Because the whole thing is in a PC text, it is almost irrelevant what we say in this policy document because of the way the way it works in Newport Center. I mean, it's very specific in the PC text and the square footages and what have you. But I support what the Planning Commission did today. I think that's fine.
I have a question. The striped here, we're saying residential, and the orange, more orange, we're saying is, you're going to have residential, high-density residential along San Joaquin Hills?
They're allowing a mixed use right there.
Okay, well, what about, is this all not mixed use? I
No.
mean, above the fire station and next to it in the police station, this is all commercial use. It may not be walk-in sales, but it's all it's all being...
They're allowing mixed use in this red house, and then they're allowing 506.
Yeah, the number of units that are allowed are 600 units, so the realities are not going to be scattered 100% through the area. They're going to be on individual sub-areas and will occupy, I can't give you a percentage, but it'll be a relatively small percentage of that total area that will actually be mixed use.
But there will not be any restriction in what area. That'll be relatively the choice of the Irvine Company and the people using that area, or what?
Based upon the review procedures of the city.
I support the Planning Commission recommendation.
Okay, we have one.
Well, let me make a comment on the recommendation.
Somebody's... That's fine, Mr. Selich, go ahead.
On 1614.5, it seems to me if we're going to mixed-use development here with housing in here, that's something that's pretty important, and it seems to me that should be a requirement. I can see the others going with the encouragement around the pedestrian connectivity in the amenities section. It seems to me that should be a requirement. Well, we're dealing with residential uses in here in the mixed-use development. It just seems to me that that's an important component. Start introducing, mixed use and residential development in an area like this.
What you're basically saying so that the residents can move into and use the adjacent commercial.
Absolutely.
Okay. I like that.
I like that, too.
Well, there's three.
Give me the two choices here again. Well, I know. Well, and you want to require, what do you want to require, Mr. Selich?
Just what it says right in the statement there. It's pretty clear to me.
Require pedestrian access and connections. In
I think
6.14.5.
Wait a minute. Hold on. Where are we?
6.14.5.
I think that if you look at the pedestrian connections that are out there today, that the Irvine Company's done an excellent job of providing pedestrian access in and amongst all of the buildings in there, and I'm not particularly concerned because I think that in their planning processes, they recognize if you don't provide pedestrian access for the residents that are in there, then they aren't going to have proper
use of the site, so I don't,
Well, let me make a couple of observations. Again, I'm okay with the discretionary. There's some outbuildings that are single-story out there in San Joaquin, and they're not owned by the Irvine Company. Let's make that as an observation. And there's some large parking lots in between the buildings that the Irvine Company own and those out parcels. So it's going to be, some of this is going to be a design difficulty, number one. Number two, it's another observation. ADA requires most of what's in here, but the ADA is perhaps not as specific as, you have the 600 building, or I think it's the 600 building where the Irvine Company exists in a multi-story, 8-story building, and then you have single-story buildings across the parking lot. It's really going to be, this is almost impossible for those owners to comply with. So I'm going to go back, I'm going to stick with the discretionary and not the required. It's just an anomaly in the area. It's just an absolute anomaly that we have some out parcels. First Americans up there in a building, single story. I don't know how you know, this connectivity, this requirement of connectivity with those buildings out there is very difficult. So I'd leave it discretionary because they're having to cross an Irvine Company parking parcel. I don't think they can do it.
I agree with Mayor Pro Tem Webb as well in that it's pretty easy to walk around Fashion Island, Newport Center. I mean, it's one of the parts of our community you can really walk around pretty easily.
Well, I think that's the problem, because you have to walk around it rather than through it. I think that's what Mr. Selch is trying to get to. You're trying to go to the shorter distance rather than the perimeter distance.
I'll support Councilman Solch's require. Correct. And I'll raise you a shall. No.
Okay, so
I would go with encourage.
So we've got 3 encourages. I thought you were encouraged, Councilman Pro Tem Webb. Right, we've got 4 encourages.
Maybe we can
I
hear
find
from
that
the
very
public
encouraging. We have 4 votes.
Okay, we have 4 votes on encourage. Okay.
is that true? Who's all for encourage on all 3? 1,
Yes.
2, 3, 4. Okay. You have direction. Any other council comment on this section? Okay.
No public comment.
Okay, we'll have public comment on Newport Center. Mr. Miller? You want require?
I would encourage you to encourage.
All right.
Again, I think that we agree with the Planning Commission, Mr. Mayor and members of the council, Dan Miller with the Irvine Company. That discussion was for discretion because it won't fit every situation. For example, it says for development expanded uses. If you're just expanding an existing building, it probably won't work to do pedestrian. So I think encourage is basically saying every time you come in, you're going to be looking to encourage that. I think in our situation, in most cases, that's not going to be a problem. But there are other outbuildings, there are small adjustments that wouldn't work. So I think when it says require, that means in all cases that has to work, and that's going to be, and we're asking for an exception in that debate. So I think encourage is the proper way to go. And then the change to the map, I think represents what GPAC and our discussions with staff was at allowing mixed use, again, limiting the amount to 600 units and 125 hotel units. So that basically is the goal, which is you're not adding any real office space. You're basically wanting to encourage the residential and hotel uses, and greater flexibility we have to see where it works best is what would be best, I think, for all.
So you're asking to stripe everything in this thing, basically?
No, I'm just saying take out required, put encourage.
Okay. But you don't, whether it's orange or red striped, you don't?
Oh, no, just in block 500 and 600, which would be those areas along San Joaquin.
You'd like those to have
be
stripes?
mixed use so that we can look at those. Again, the Islands Hotel is in block 600, so most logically that is going to be an area that you're going to look at, create additional hotel units for residential. And again, based on the policy of basically in terms of development scale, that's where you wanted the higher density moving down to lower density. So it's consistent with all your goals and policies. I just think the the map was in error.
Okay, any other,
Corner, you have some single-story buildings close to MacArthur. Do you want to be able to go to...
Just the flexibility. It's most likely most of this would go where is 600 and over, but just to have the flexibility in 500, it may work there. Again, we'll get into the details. Again, the main thing is you're limiting to 600 units, so as Woody indicated, you're not going to be able to do a lot of this all over the place. So it gives us the flexibility to see where it works best.
are you committed to a grocery store there too? No, I'm just kidding. Sorry. That's really.
Next to the affordable housing.
Thank you, Mr.
I
Miller.
think
Any
we
other
can use a
questions?
grocery store there.
Have to use your library card.
They took it out. All right. Any other public comment on Newport Center? Yes, come on up, please.
Do we want to consider any possible rezoning above the library?
Perfect, there you go. I knew that was
Why not?
I'm not touching that one.
Good evening. My name is Laura Curran. I live in Corona Del Mar. Specifically to this topic of pedestrian connectivity, I appreciate the encourage versus require debate. I would comment more. When we are encouraging, I think it's appropriate because, and I commented to GPAC, right now when you walk around Fashion Island and when you walk from CDM up to Fashion Island, there's many stretches where you basically have long areas of sidewalk with grass next to them and not a lot of variety. And so I often see myself being the only person walking. Maybe I'm the only person crazy enough to walk from my house up to Fashion Island. It's only a mile. But there you go. So over time, as we're working with folks to continue to add new development in that area or working with folks on landscaping, any movement that adds variety, adds places for people to sit and reflect, makes it more interesting and inviting for people to walk along the Fashion Island circle and between the areas of Fashion Island, I would be encouraging of. Okay? Because then you will reduce the number of trips for people. I mean, I've gone to meet people up at 600, for lunch, and they say, well, yeah, let's drive over to Fashion Island. So it's just across the street. So the more we can do to make it inviting to walk, the more I would be in favor of it. Thank you.
Public comment still open, Newport Center. All right, I'll close it. Next area, please.
We're going to move into the corridors. And the first of those, I'm bypassing the airport because we considered airport last time, moving to page 57. There's a first series of area-wide policies beginning on page 57 to the top of page 56, addressing the overall corridors regardless of the location in the city. And these address elements such as parcel utilization, shared parking facilities, and design compatibility with adjoining residential areas. We then move on to West Newport area. And basically, the recommendations here are consistent with, and the policies are consistent with the discussion that the council had previously and is reflected by the GPAC as well. The one change, if you turn to page 59, is policy 6.17.2. And this was actually a policy direction that the council originally considered. This was the redesignation of properties in this area that are designated as R2. And at the time we met with you a few months ago addressing this particular area, staff had indicated there had been meetings with residents within the area as well, and they supported the notion of a reduced zoning to an R1 designation. The council basically, for purposes of the environmental impact report, maintained the R2. Now that we have come down to land use recommendations in this area, both the GPAC and the City Planning Commission today recommended redesignation to the R1 classification. So the other uses are consistent with what we had talked about previously.
Just a point of clarification, because the purple area there, or blue, whatever it is.
It's not correctly aligned.
I'm sorry?
Keep going.
he's talking about across the street. Yeah, he's talking about, the policy here says, redesignate R2 properties on the coastal side of West Coast Highway for single family. What about the oceanfront strip there? So it is a wide area then it is considered on that. The map is not correct. And
And I'm not sure if
Considering the
we went
whole
far
white
enough
area
east.
there?
well, yeah,
Is that, because you can't build where the blue is now, can you? I mean, isn't that a parking lot or something?
no, those are homes.
There is one set of homes there.
Yes.
The way it's shown on the map is it's between Seashore and the alley. And
Correct.
what you really wanted to do is between Seashore and the oceanfront.
Yes.
Right.
So that the correct designation would be everything, all of the houses that are out there on the ocean side of Coast Highway.
Other than that, the visioning meeting that I held for the West Newport residents, was there any other input sought on the rezoning of those properties?
Yes, at the public workshop we held in June, and there was support for this at both the morning and afternoon session there, too.
Do we have any idea of how many properties are impacted by that?
No, we have not counted.
Why do we want to even do that? If a person wants to use it as an R1, I mean, they have all the capability of doing it if they own both units. And if they want to use it as an R2, why are we're going to mixed use, we're going to higher density. Everywhere else, why are we trying to downzone the residential?
In this area, the people who were at Councilman Rosansky's visioning meeting thought that it was a good idea to promote additional owner occupancy in the area and help them with some of the problems they have from the rentals to students and the summer rentals and party houses and that sort of thing.
Well, how would you apply this to an R2 that's already there?
It would remain as a non-conforming use.
And then if they remodeled it significantly, then it would have to go to R1, right?
Well, we could discuss how firm we wanted to be on that when the time comes to amend the zoning ordinance to implement this.
I just feel that if people want to use an R2 as an R1, I'm doing that myself. I don't see any restriction should be made on it. But to say that house remains that way forever, I mean, there may be other reasons at a later date that I might want to have a tenant. I mean, it just seems to me that those people might as well have the flexibility they have now. There's no, they can build either R1 or R2 on that lot to the same density, so I don't see the reason to restrict them further, is what I'm saying.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Webb?
Yeah, am I confused here? Isn't this a recommendation that was put in there because the residents and property owners in the area that is affected asked for it?
Well, they didn't ask for it, but they supported it when we asked them.
We threw it out as a query. Do you think it's a good idea basically to rezone those properties from an R2 to an R1? And I'd say the vast majority of the people, and there was probably 70 to 80 people here, did raise their hand. Now, I guess my hesitation with the whole thing is were the folks that were here, the owners of those types of properties. I think a lot of them were either from Newport Shores or Lido Sands or Versailles and other areas. I don't know that we saw, duplex owners that may be absentee owners or use those properties in the summertime and not in the winter, and so they may not have been there or known about the meeting. I would comment that the trend, I think, where I've seen properties torn down completely is that they are being built as single-family residences, and that people are not tearing down and new construction going in as duplexes. I think that is the trend there. So to that extent, we are supporting that, but we are limiting people's options of trying to put in duplexes there. Some of those lots, especially the ones that are circled, on that diagram there
Too small.
are too small for 2 units. They do have 2 units, but they're too small for them. The oceanfront properties, however, could support 2 units, and many do currently.
They're quite large, a lot of those. I mean, my son lived down there and had a duplex, and both units were quite large. I mean, 1,600 square feet, that's a pretty good size.
Well, I don't think you're seeing that in the vast majority of the properties. In the strip that's delineated currently on the diagram that we see, most of them are smaller properties. Either they are single-family now, one
But down
unit.
toward the ocean, wouldn't you agree that there are larger properties?
There's a few, I didn't say all of them, I said the vast majority. But yes, down closer to the ocean, there are full-width lots. If you look a little further over, though, the lots are cut in half, and so they aren't full-width.
Okay, I think that I would support the Planning Commission and GPAC recommendations, and let's go forward.
Maybe Nancy could enlighten us a little bit more on GPAC and what they thought.
We had information that the residents supported it and went along with that.
So it was basically the same information as far as the West Newport visioning meeting that we had.
This is not by any means a final decision, and so we don't have to have the final word on this. There can be opportunities to try and get the word out to more property owners in the area, and see how more people feel about this before you make your final decision. We did try to do that in the most recent newsletter, but
There was, not to complicate the matter, but there were some other areas of town I know that we're looking at doing the same thing. And I know there was extensive outreach, I think, on Balboa Island with regard to doing this same exact thing. What was the experience in those other areas?
we had also proposed it initially for the Balboa Peninsula, and quite a few people came to the GPAC meeting and spoke in opposition to this notion there, and so you'll see that it's not in the recommendations.
And why do you think that there was a difference between the West Newport and that area?
I don't know, but I'm surmising that the people on the peninsula don't have the same concerns about the need for more owner occupancy and fewer rentals and seasonal rentals that the West Newport neighborhood has. On Balboa Island, planning director had, she's at the podium, she can tell you about it.
Well, I'll just put one little finishing touch first on Sharon's discussion on the Balboa Peninsula, because I was the person that did staff the area workshop, I get all the names mixed up.
The June workshop.
The June workshop for the Balboa Peninsula. I think there were 2 things at work. First, that those areas don't experience the really heavy problems from the non-owner residents. They don't have as many short-term lodging issues. They don't have the...
On the peninsula as opposed to West Newport, I would think it would be diametrically opposite.
No, on Balboa, they do not experience as much as there is in West Newport, where you have the short-term lodging and the 4th of July issues and a lot.
How do you define, give me a street where you're cutting it off, because I think once you start heading down the peninsula, there's a lot more summer rentals and a lot more apartment issues and a lot more police-associated problems than there are, say, 48th Street to the river jetty.
As I have understood from the police departments on the problems on the peninsula relate more to the commercial areas and the high number of alcoholic beverage establishments and not to issues in the residential neighborhoods. And I'm just telling you what I was told by way of their own perception. I haven't analyzed it to know whether it's true or not. The other is that there really does seem to be a lot of people who believe strongly that in order for them to stay on the peninsula, they need to maintain a clear and unclouded ability to have rental income in order to stay in their location because of the income they obtain from the second unit. Those seem to be the 2 key reasons.
But then again, no one's being forced to tear down their building. It's only if you tear down the building,
they are concerned about being made nonconforming. They think that it limits their ability to refinance and have other options for their property.
So, but I would argue, I guess, that, and I mean, not that it's not right for them, but I think maybe.
Mr. Mayor, could we get back on point? I mean, we're arguing about.
Well, I think the point is that I want to make sure that there is a rational reason for doing this. I'm not saying I'm against it, but it seems like there was more extensive outreach down the peninsula as to what the desires of the owners were.
No, I think West Newport has had the most direct contact with folks.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
I think more individuals participated in the various opportunities to express their opinion on this issue in West Newport than they did on the peninsula, where it was limited just to the June workshop, which were attended maybe by about maybe a total of 50 for both sessions. Oh, I'm getting there. We'll get it.
Certainly when we considered the condominium issue in Corona Del Mar and parking, there were a lot of people that wanted to keep the condominiums, not have to have the extra parking. We did impose that on them. I'm not saying that it's bad, but basically I think people wanted the option to be able to rent part of their home without having any restriction and get some income out of it.
Well, I guess I'm willing to go along with the recommendation of the GPAC and the Planning Commission with the caveat or the understanding that I may have
change
other ideas later on down. As I think I'm going to spend a little bit more time with people in that area and make sure that they truly understand what's being done.
And I think that makes sense, is that if we, in the process, we get down to the point where we have this substantial outcry from those particular property owners that they don't want to see a change, then we have to reconsider it. But if we don't get that outcry, then I think it makes sense.
All right.
Here we go. So that's two.
Do you want to hear about Balboa Island? No.
Not yet. Thank you. Thank you, Pat. Okay, we have two. Three. 4. Okay. 4 is up. 4 and out. Okay, any other areas in this? I'm not talking about, but any more changes before I go to public comment?
No. Oh, well, I have a question. What do you mean by this staging area for the park? I guess I have a real concern. Some third party comes in, buys this property, and I mean, you know, the staging area could be all the property, and you take away all economic viable use. It's so vague that I don't know what it means. And I can tell you, I know people who are trying to buy that property, and the last thing they want to hear is they have to put some staging area for the river park there. Again, what does it mean?
It's perhaps we should flip them and call the staging area the alternative, but it wasn't intended to be a requirement. But if community groups working on the Orange Coast River Park were able to, this would be a good staging area to provide for parking and access to that.
And that's fine, but a third party who's coming in and relies on the ability to do some type of residential project there, now he's going to be deprived economically.
Only if someone buys the property from them.
Pardon me?
Only if someone buys the property from them.
Wait a minute. The property it will trade hands here in the foreseeable future. And whoever buys that property is going to want to put residential there.
And they'll be able to.
Okay. On the entire parcel?
Yes.
And so then if the staging area, then the river park people would have to buy it at fair market value.
Exactly.
Okay. If that's what it says, I support that. If there's some kind of requirement here that they have to dedicate a portion of it, okay.
May I also include that there's whoever buys that property, there is disputed area of that property that's
It's
city
in the bay.
highlands.
I mean,
It's
in
our
the
property,
Right.
and it's been taken over, and so it makes that property look a lot bigger than it is, and there is city property there to be able to develop some type of a public access staging area that might not even impact the property, as long as the people that buy it know that they're not getting the rights to develop
Yeah.
that area that somebody else has.
I'm just concerned about the policy, not the
Right.
specifics. That's all. And now that it's been explained, I'm fine.
Okay, any other council input on this? Okay, West Newport, public comments open. No public, no comment on West Newport? Public comment? Okay. Next area.
Next area is Old Newport Boulevard. The discussion with the council a number of months ago suggested mixed use as an alternative on either side of Old Newport Boulevard. Remember, the based uses in this area are considering the opportunities for medical-related uses. You've seen a development of a number of such uses in support of Hoag Hospital in this area. The plan and the policies suggest those kinds of uses, suggest retail uses that would serve the upland neighborhoods, and also provided for, again, mixed use on either side of the boulevard. The committee, the General Plan Advisory Committee, as you will see here in red, as well as the Planning Commission, suggested to limit the mixed use to the east side of the Old Newport Boulevard as a transition with the upland residential neighborhoods. They also made one additional change in terms of the policy 6.18.3 on building heights. They deleted the last line. So in the building heights where there was the opportunity to increase for mixed use to 3 stories, which is the currently permitted height within the area, they deleted the connection that provided that the view sheds of upland residential units are maintained. Excuse me.
In other words, 3 stories are allowed
today
to block the views.
And
whereas this requirement as written, the 3 stories would only be allowed if they didn't block the views.
The concern was with introducing the notion of protecting private views, which the city has never done. And it says the height may be increased to 3 stories, so that's something for further consideration.
And that 3 stories is permitted under the Old Newport Boulevard specific plan, Patty? Is that?
The current height limit in Old Newport Boulevard is 32 feet. For most commercial development, that means 2 stories, but with certain designs or mixed residential, you could probably get 3 within that, even without the use permit for the extra height.
Can't we just leave this at 32 feet rather than mentioning the word 3 stories?
Okay, where do we go from here? Is staff done with comment to this area?
So again,
go over for me again.
the
This
consideration,
mixed use-
the mixed use on the west side of the street was what the council originally wanted to consider for the EIR.
Right.
The advisory committee limited it to the east side, felt it was more appropriate in that side as a
Is
transition.
that, in other words, the away from Newport Boulevard?
Yes, that's correct.
And what is that little island between old and current Newport Boulevard? What's that going to be?
That would allow the medical office, the retail, neighborhood serving.
That's not
retail
mixed use?
It's medical office and retail is not classified as mixed use. Mixed use would only apply to when housing is integrated into the area.
Well, then my question is, could you do housing in that island?
Not according to the Planning Commission recommendation or the GPAC
Okay,
recommendation.
it's fine, I understand. Any council comment to that? Soch?
I support that.
Okay, we got one.
I support it as long as we get rid of the 3-story and use a 32-foot height limit instead. Patty?
But our height limit does allow up to 50 under certain criteria, so that would essentially say that you don't get that option.
Just a point of clarification for the council. One of the reasons we went to 3 stories here was to achieve the mixed-use development, 2 levels of housing, 1 level of retail. That's why that was specified.
But you do have in the existing area that backs up to that area some potential for those houses to be up high enough to where their second stories could get some views. If you allow for the 3-story on the area right behind them, I know we're not supposed to protect private views, but all of those people bought their houses based on there being the 32-foot height limit, recognizing there's a possibility for 50 feet. Isn't the 50 feet in the island area? It's in the both area?
What's the reason for encouraging mixed use with residential on that street?
The original discussion, I believe, with the GPAC, and now we're going back way, when I was a youth here, it seems. The discussion at the time was recognizing that some of the commercial uses aren't as viable, and there is a conversion to a fairly significant conversion to medical office, but the retail uses, they felt that would be increasing the customer base, and it would be a better transition with the upland neighborhoods as well. And it would be an opportunity to also ultimately have an evolution from some of the auto-oriented uses that are there today to other uses that are more supportive of the upland neighborhoods.
As opposed to having medical uses?
Well, as opposed to having auto-related uses, auto shops and things of that
uses
nature.
are disappearing as medical. I mean, there's 3 projects under construction on that street right now. 2 of them are medical, I think, and one, actually all 3 have a medical component.
But all on the west side.
All the west side.
I'm sorry?
There's one right in front of Orange and Boulevard.
The old muffler shop.
Yeah, the corner piece, there's, I think, a piece a little further up, and the Board of Realtors is building an office with medical on the 2nd floor on the west side. But I'm just saying that whole corridor seems to be going medical because that's certainly more.
But would you want
valuable.
50-foot buildings on the island? I mean,
Not
if you
really.
had 50-foot medical buildings on that island, it would block all the views that you're protecting with 32-foot on the east side. Why?
I'm not saying anything about 50-foot. I'm just curious as to what the reason was to promote the mixed use with residential as opposed to mixed use with office, medical office with retail down below. If that's what they wanted.
Okay, so where are we?
Just supporting the document as written.
Okay, who has support for your position, Mr. Webb? Who's going to back you? So we can-
Related to the
Height.
32 feet
Height.
rather than 3-story?
Right.
I think you're boxing yourself in the corner. You better maybe take another stab at this at a later date. Okay. No, I think you better study it.
All right, well, let's see if anybody supports you, Don. Okay?
I support the document as written. I mean, Don can come back later and have one issue.
Well, there's no support for it, so we have a straw vote to keep it.
I don't object to that. No, but just let you come back later.
All right, are we clear on this? Okay.
That's with the Planning Commission recommendations.
All right, any other council comment on this before we open up the public? Okay. Stiggles, are you ready before we open it up?
Just a question, and that is, are we going to accommodate in the island 50-foot office buildings?
Is that what the zoning code currently says, Ben? She said 35/50.
And this policy would preclude this unless you have a 50.
Yes, the height limit is 32/50 currently and has been since 1972. The 50 feet can be achieved only upon designing a project to comply with some very specific findings in the zoning code.
And what are those? I mean, are they that you don't block views or that kind of thing? Or are they something totally different?
The key criteria, the most difficult to achieve, is the requirement that the project provide more public visual open space and views than would be experienced by a regularly conforming project. So it would normally need to set your building off to a side or provide a much greater setback or something else near a public amenity such as a park or a street in order to qualify.
I'm sorry, that if I put a 50-foot building on there and it were to be allowed, it would have to have more visual planes and so forth through it so public could see view, whatever view there is, than if I put a 32-foot building on it.
If there were a view present across the property, that would be the most likely way of designing that project.
Okay, so why don't we just say a 32-foot limit? Wouldn't that be better?
Because
I mean, then we won't get a high building, short building, high building,
Because
short.
then you could have a 32-foot building occupy the entire width of the property and lose any opportunity to see anything through it.
But does this have that kind of zoning on it? I mean, it can go
Yes.
up 32 feet with the 3-foot setback on either side?
There are actually 0 setbacks on either side.
So 0 setbacks, so then do we need a zoning on this instead? So that the buildings have, like they're presently, parking on the front or parking below and not a complete building that's covering the entire lot?
Well, you're trying to design a building through zoning regulations. I think that gets a little
Well,
difficult.
my question, how would you do it? But I'm saying, what kind of restrictions would you put on the island? If we don't have, if you don't want a 30, I don't think we want a 3250 on any of this, from what I can see.
I think that that's a zoning
the
code
council's
issue,
decision.
so we need to address that when we are looking at zoning codes rather than this. We already have 4 people agreeing to the planning commission item. Why don't we move on to the next item? After public comments.
Okay, we'll have public comment, Old Newport Boulevard. Okay, we'll close it. Next area, please.
Okay, the next area is Mariners Mile. The recommendations of the committee were to, let me go back to the original recommendations from the City Council. You had discussed the possibility of allowing for mixed-use development along a harbor frontage under certain specifications that I'll refer to you, the policies in a moment. The General Plan Advisory Committee recommended no housing along the harbor front as their change. The Planning Commission this afternoon instituted a recommendation for housing, your original recommendation, and the policy for that within the area. So maybe you can, Greg, go to the policies so you can refer to the language. 6.19.2, as you have in your printed version, showed the strikeout that the General Plan Advisory Committee had made, which was to delete the residential being allowed. The Planning Commission has shown here reintegrated the language that was struck out in the version that you have in front of you. So it allows for the housing, again, with 200 lineal feet of frontage and 50%.
Let me stop you. Was there a vote on the Plan Commission to that change? Or was it unanimous, or?
The straw vote, and I think it was, wasn't it? There were 2. Okay.
So it was a 5-2?
5-2.
Okay.
The other changes, Greg, if you can scroll down below, and this one's a relatively minor change under the policy regarding parking. This was introduced by the advisory committee to require adequate parking for supporting facilities for charters, yacht sales, other waterfront uses. The committee, the Planning Commission added back in visitor serving as well as other waterfront uses as well. Moving ahead to policy 6.19.7, which addressed where the housing would be in this corridor. The GPAC's action had originally deleted this policy, which stipulated that the housing would be to the street side of the harbor fronting uses. It originally said the rear of. We changed it to the street side. The Planning Commission reintroduced this. The GPAC automatically had excluded that because housing was not allowed under their recommendations along the harbor front. And then there was some discussion about the Bayview policy. This originally read, you can see it in the text in front of you, that buildings be located and designed to provide views of the bay from the Coast Highway. The committee added language that said that the buildings be located sites design, and they added the sites design to also address issues such as the location of landscape along the frontage, so the landscape could have block views or gazebos or other kinds of on-site elements other than the buildings themselves. And they added the language to provide adequate and unobstructed views of the bay from the Coast Highway. The commission made some changes. They were concerned about the language and the potential limitations of the terminology adequate and unobstructed and the inference that would have. So they changed that to read significant visual corridors to the bay from the Coast Highway. And I believe those were the only significant changes in this section.
So they use the word view corridor, though. The word corridor is the
Visual corridor.
Significant
yeah, but
visual
they
corridor.
also corridor. The other one doesn't use the word corridor. It just, I mean, you could virtually take out all buildings.
That was the concern.
Yeah, so they use the word corridor. I didn't quite understand your one on 6.19.7, Woody. What did the Planning Commission do?
The Planning Commission reinstituted the policy. If you turn to page 66 in the document, you see it originally read, require the properties developed for housing locate the units to the rear of or above harbor fronting uses. The only
So they reinstituted that language?
They reinstituted that language, and they just made a wording change, grammatical change. Instead of saying to the rear of, they basically changed that language to say to the street side of those uses.
So I know what the rear meant.
Well, what does or above harbor fronting uses?
Could be a mixed-use building.
Oh, okay.
Retail
okay,
below.
okay, I got you.
Woody, can I address this question to the GPAC? Why did you not want housing on the bay side of Coast Highway?
The same concern of before, the example I think that brings in everybody's mind, it was brought up earlier today, was the Bay Club, but that housing would dominate, come to dominate, and we lose more space along the harbor to just housing. And the feeling was that when people talked about mixed use, the assumption had been, for some of us at least, that they meant inland, and with that mixed use would help support the whole area, but we didn't need the housing on the ocean side for that reason.
But you didn't deal with height issues or anything else along that area in any type of use?
The main discussion was on the views, and that was a long discussion. And I think that was, again, the concern that whatever occurred there was going to be a wall of development.
Yeah, but if it was a wall of mixed use versus a wall of housing, how is it any different if it's a wall of a building?
Well, there are two issues. But the main concern was we just felt that once housing started, that the housing would predominate. There was a concern that there would be housing and not many other uses there. That was where we came
Okay, that's good. That's fine. Thank you.
I know, certainly a major part of this goal is getting this general plan amendment approved, and I see this as something that could really bring on a lot of controversy, differing from the GPAC recommendation.
Yeah, I also support the GPAC recommendation. I prefer to keep the housing on the inland side and leave it seems like a fairly vibrant community over there, as it is with the restaurants. We've seen the problem. I mean, the restaurants create problems with the homes across the bay, let alone having 40 condominiums next door. So I think we're mixed-using our city to death here in this general plan. I'd like to see some areas preserved for commercial use and commercial use only. So I would be in favor of reverting back to the GPAC.
I support the Planning Commission. I think that this is a situation similar to the Lido Village area, that we have an opportunity, and really there's only one large parcel that may ultimately end up being developed with mixed use. But I think that having the mixed use on the Coast Highway side is going to potentially provide us with perhaps a lower density combination of buildings that will give us a little bit more opportunity for views and bayside uses, so that I support the Planning Commission recommendations.
Gabe, let's go on that side.
Mr. Mayor, I do too. I think mixed use, I understand Nancy Gardner's comments, and I agree with you. What's the difference between a commercial building and a residential building? Actually, residential creates less impact on the highway than a commercial use, quite candidly. And if you limit this to only commercial use, we've already shown that Mariners Mile is suffering probably from too much commercial. They could build more restaurants here, creates more impact, more traffic, more noise, and yet we're encouraging it. So I do want to encourage a mixed use. I think a well-designed, it doesn't have to, and Nancy, I think we all agree we would never approve another Bay Club. I think that's a given. I guess I don't want to knee-jerk react to that, but I think a mixed use, you could put in small bistro. There will be a walkway in front of this property, probably a spa, some other uses, probably a central entry area. I could see this being just absolutely gorgeous to the entire community, and at the same time mitigating the impacts, and that's really what's more important here. We're looking at impacts that if you continue to state just commercial use, and somebody comes in like this project down at Dover and PCH, which is highly dense and tuck-under parking, that's insanity. That's quite candidly. I have grave concerns about that, but they're within their right under the zoning law to build that project. But that's what you're setting up here. And then you really have all the problems of traffic, noise, and the congestion that it brings. I think a well-designed, integrated commercial residential use is the best of all worlds, and it really offers more flexibility, more creativity, and less impacts ultimately.
I happen to agree with GPAC, and I think by the council having their hands tied on the Dover PCH project the way they apparently have, that will be a beacon when this general plan comes up to a vote. And I agree, and I'll take a cautionary concession here to GPAC. Because of the objective of getting this general plan approved, that I agree with GPAC on this.
Well, what I just heard you say, and I'm not sure, correct me where I'm wrong, it's kind of like, well, I want to get this through and I don't want to worry about green light. And I think that's not the appropriate way to look at this. This is, I think green light is going to do what they're going to do anyhow. I think they're going to send out a manifesto on a very detailed and well thought out document. I don't think you should succumb to that pressure. I think that
I'm not succumbing to that. I'm succumbing to the fact that GPAC is the one that made this recommendation.
Well, but I don't know what kind of discussion they had. But the uses along Mariners Mile are not going to change. There's only one vacant piece. It's 4 acres. I think it's maybe 4 on the bay side and 4 on the inland side. There's only one piece. The remainder uses are there. They're viable. They provide a good economic balance, although I will tell you the Marine Center has a very difficult time staying leased because of its constraints to the commercial and marine uses. The restaurants are visitor serving. The charter boats are in there. I think we have to really create a situation here for a parcel that will come someday, will be processed. I don't know when. I don't think any of us know when, but I think the greater flexibility you leave there. Sure, everybody would love to just leave it like it is, but I don't think that deprives the owner of really a good viable use.
Mr. Mayor?
Well, let me finish. Okay, I'm finished.
Okay.
Well, you cut me, just let me finish.
It's hard to, sorry I couldn't quite figure out when you're wrapping up. The appropriateness that I'm responding to is we have a citizens committee, 38 people, all walks of life from our community. They've come up with these recommendations. I represent the citizens. This is what the citizens have come up with. That's what I'm responding to. And the more that we can be aligned with the wishes of our citizens committee, I think this is what it's all about up here.
I guess that I'm a little bit confused because you didn't take that same position in Lido Village. You didn't take the same position on Balboa. I think that we have a situation that's extremely similar to both of those areas.
Actually, I didn't vote for either of those, if you look back at the tape.
Okay.
All right, well, and you're for the Plan Commission.
That's right.
Good, all right. Well, there were 3-3 then. All right, Mr. Selich.
Councilman Nichols hasn't weighed in.
No, but that's fine. I think I'm counting 3-3. So go ahead.
Yeah, that's what you need here, 3-3. My question is on the parking. That's a problem down there, and I'm not sure that we want another big high-rise parking lot. That would be something that would probably be opposed by Newport Heights more than anything, and yet this is what we're relatively coming to by the 6.195 that says parking required adequate parking and other supporting facilities for charters, yachts, sails, and other waterfront uses. If we have high waterfront uses, you're basically requiring a parking garage, and I just want to reflect that. I'm well aware of that commercial block down there that is used for restaurant parking, and he's got it parked solid, and people are crying because, oh gee, if I sneak in there and park, I get towed. Well, and we're even calling it predatory towing, and we're going on all kinds of stuff. Well, you're going to see more and more of that if we're getting our density too high, our charters in there. That has not been acceptable. My question is do we want multi-story parking lots down there, and what is our choice? And I'd like to hear just a little discussion on that regarding our densities that we go forward with there. I think if we go with just commercial along the bay, we need to look at that parking aspect, and we also need to consider that there's going to be some noise that's going to be heard across the channel at Lido. And are we telling these people in good faith, we want you to build your restaurants here, we want you to put in the kind of facilities people want that have music and have a little bit of noise, and yet we're going to force you out of there because we have problems across the bay.
Okay, well, let's take these one at a time. Mr. Selich.
What happens with if we go with the GPAC recommendation, what happens with the existing residential structures that are there? I think there's two. They become non-conforming?
They're non-conforming today.
Oh, they are non-conforming now? Well, I think I'm going to weigh in on the side of GPAC on this one. I tend to agree with some of the other comments that have been made regarding the fact that we've got this group, the Citizens Committee, that's been out here working on this, and it seems to be a big issue with them, and I guess I tend to weigh in on their side on it. Although I will make one comment that that maybe one of the things they might want to consider taking a look at is taking a look at where there might be one or two opportunities to do some mixed use on the bayfront and leave the rest of it is pure commercial. That might be another alternative. But absent that, I would just support the GPAC recommendation.
Okay. Well, Mr. Ridgway?
A question for Mr. Selich. How does that look, some concept of mixed use? I guess I'm confused by that last comment.
Well, I only see a couple of practical applications absent some large-scale lot consolidation for really doing a mixed-use development that meets this 200-foot frontage. And I can't say that I know all of the property ownership there very precisely, but just from my knowledge, I can only think of 2 instances where there's 200 feet of frontage down there right now. So I guess I would say I would see those as being candidates for mixed-use development and the rest being retail or commercial.
Well, we're only talking about one piece here, Ed. I mean, let's call a spade. You know, and there is only one piece that has 200 feet, and that would qualify for, under your comments, it would qualify for mixed use. I'm confused.
No, that's correct, and that's what I was saying, that, I would like for GPAC to take a look at making an exception for that. I think there's another one too, but maybe I'm wrong. There's another piece that has 200 feet of frontage, but maybe I'm wrong on that.
Well, does that sound reasonable, Nancy, to go back and look at those?
We've revisited a couple of issues, so there's no reason why we couldn't do that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I would.
Because I think having the 1 or 2 opportunities for mixed use, it allows for good utilization of that property, and it still stays within what I perceive anyway is what the goal of GPAC is what happens along the bay frontage here, and quite frankly, I just see this land ownership pattern as you get west of Tustin being so cut up. I just don't see any real lot consolidation that's going to take place there that's going to give us the 200 feet of frontage.
Well, and I would remind Nancy, because obviously I'm making my case, but the John Dominus building and the office building next door where all the charter boats are, those are multi-story with, tuck-under parking or parking underneath. And that's what you're encouraging, that type of development on the Ardell site. And I don't think any of us really want that. I think we would prefer to have something that is classier and doesn't have the impact, the traffic impact and the view impact on us. There's an opportunity here, and those 2 buildings were built at a different time, a different place. Would they happen today? Probably not. So if you guys could revisit it, I think Ed has a good comment about anything that has over 200 feet. It offers flexibility in planning. That's what it really offers. And under any scenario, big buildings can be put there, but if you encourage all commercial, the impacts of all commercial is greater than a mixed-use integrated unit or a mixed-use complex. It just is.
Mr. Mayor, could I ask a question?
Yes.
If we believe that with the 200-foot minimum frontage requirement, there would only be 1 or 2 parcels that would be able to do the mixed-use development, and it's acceptable for those 2 parcels to have mixed-use development, I'm not sure what we gain by sending it back to GPAC and what else they might do besides limiting it to those 2 parcels and calling them out specifically. Are we trying to prevent future lot consolidation?
Well, that's what I'd like to hear is what their opinion of it is.
I don't think you're going to...
And the question for them is?
Consider mixed use on the 200-foot and over. It's pretty simple.
Yeah.
To reconsider that recommendation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just right now, wait, would be that really either the Ardell parcel and perhaps considering that the Ardell parcel might combine with the one between Ardell and the Sea Scout base to where you might have a full frontage if things worked out along that area, that would be mixed use? Is that what they're looking at? Just that one chunk?
If that's the only one that's 200 feet or greater, yeah.
Well, are we asking the GPAC to name the sites, to call out the sites where mixed use would be allowed, or to reconsider whether the 200-foot minimum frontage standard is acceptable?
Well,
No, my idea is for them to evaluate the sites that are 200 feet or greater as to whether they would be acceptable for mixed use.
You're talking about the
Leaving the rest
existing
out.
sites,
The
not
existing
potentially sites that could be consolidated in the future.
Yes.
So
In other words,
so whatever site that currently has 200 feet of frontage on Coast Highway, you want them to reconsider for
Yes.
mixed use?
why don't we just say reconsider that parcel, change the map to where the D goes across the street in that particular area, from really the boat sales place to the Sea Scout base. And
That would be possible if that's their recommendation. I'd like to hear their opinion of it.
Okay, let's move on.
I think you got 4 votes. Do you want to go on with this?
I just want to have,
That's what we
you
did
have
other
direction?
places.
Okay, all right. Any other comment on this section by council? Okay. Public comment?
Good evening. I'm Dan Daniels. I'm with Ardell Investment Company. I said good afternoon earlier today to the Planning Commission. My back kind of hurt when I stood up coming down here, so forgive me for not standing ramrod straight. It's been a very interesting session. A couple of things I'd like to point out to you. One item, just a procedural item, on page 12 of the document, the lined out item regarding the zoning type, the land use regulations for mixed use weren't mentioned as something that, if mixed use was to be approved, that would be reinstituted. The Planning Commission is another public body that spent a lot of time looking at this and talking about it today from 3 o'clock to 6:30, I believe. I think their opinion should be held in good stead, as well as the GPAC committee. I believe I saw 5 people positive on the issue of mixed use, and the chairman of the Planning Commission was against it, and Mr. McDaniel, I don't believe, commented one way or the other, just to set the record straight. Also, going back to the GPAC committee, when they talked about this issue of mixed use last summer, it was not 100% feeling that this was not a use that should be allowed. And on the Saturday morning at the library, my recollection is maybe there were 30 people and maybe 8 or 9 were in favor, and the balance was against it. Don't hold me to those figures, but I believe that was approximately the review by the GPAC. I remember several people on the GPAC feeling quite strongly about mixed use. Some of the reasons given during the Planning Commission meeting today were that being against mixed use on large properties on the bayfront. Some of the reasons given were that that'll push out coastal marine type uses. And one thing I did not mention when I got up here, Ardell Investment Company has 700 feet on the bayfront. Most people always feel what they have is best, but I've been going to that property every day for a long time, 30-plus years, and it is, I think, a world-class parcel, and I think this city deserves to have something nice put on that property. The reason nothing's happened there for the last 20 years is because the existing specific plan has very unattractive uses for development. Revitalization is necessary in Mayor's Mile. Nothing of substance has happened in a long time, and there's a reason for that. In order to revitalize that area, there has to be an economic impetus to do so. And the only impetus I see, specifically for our property, is some type of allowance of a mixed use. And, I think then you'll see the revitalization that's necessary in Mayor's Mile. With me tonight, and I don't know if she's going to speak, is our neighbor who owns the 100 feet currently occupied by Duffy. There's no other place in Newport Beach where you have 800 feet of harbor frontage that is essentially undeveloped. And this is a great opportunity for the city to do something nice. Nobody knocks on my door ever about commercial type uses on our property. It knocks on the door all day long about residential type uses. We know that's not practical to talk about doing the entire project as residential. And that's why we actually came to this meeting 4 months ago and suggested there be a 50% limit on any residential uses. With that, I thank you for listening and would encourage you to seriously consider the mixed use for these parcels.
Dan, I want to make a comment to you and to council and to Nancy. Because of the California Coastal Commission, I think it's good. You would be required to put all the downstairs as commercial. I'm really satisfied in order to get, if it went a mixed use, probably under Coastal Commission guidelines, we'd probably have to put the majority, if not all of that commercial. But that's...
Oh, I would think so.
Yeah.
I mean, the concept, the arguments I've heard about not wanting to do mixed use on the bay side of Coast Highway have been the residential use will be the primary use, and there won't be any marine uses or commercial uses. And that's not what's included in this proposal, this before you tonight. It's 50% residential type uses combined with other existing marine visitor serving uses. Thank you very much.
I'd like to
Hold
ask
on.
you a question.
Please.
Thank you. Go ahead, Jim.
No, it's for you.
I would just, how would you handle the parking? Would you put a high-rise across the street, or how would you handle the parking?
We've had...
With individual units, would they be rental, or would they be ownership? I
think knowing the type of ownership is probably speculative right now. But we've had a lot of developers come to us over the last few years with proposals, and we've had architects look at the property. Parking is not an issue. I think the use of subterranean parking would be an answer to it.
So you would park, particularly on the bay side, as a piece of property, you would look at underground parking underneath the buildings, pretty much.
And surface parking as well. And surface parking as well.
Between.
But all with, we'd have to provide the required parking or it doesn't get approved.
No, the question is now most of the commercial there is parking across the street or down the street or something like that with valet type.
Yeah, we have a closed restaurant that has 145 spaces that's unused, and we have not leased the restaurant out because we don't want to have an encumbrance on that property. We want to be able to do something that's much more meaningful and.
Well, I understand that, but you would be using your parking for some part of the structures that you're talking about.
Oh, absolutely. No, I was saying there is existing parking in Mary's Mile.
But you wouldn't have that room to put it there in the future because you're going to have buildings there, is what I'm speaking
to. I'm
so
saying,
I'm just questioning how would you...
The parking would be a constraint on the amount of development to occur. And the 50-50 would be a constraint on the type of development to occur.
And Dick, there are height limits in there. Matter of fact, Patty, could you tell us what the height limits are along there right now, as currently exist?
The current parking...
No, height.
I'm tired, too.
28 feet.
Height limit is 26 feet, with the ability to perhaps achieve 35 feet with the same criteria previously.
So open corridors and viewscapes and all that. Okay.
Thank you again.
Good evening. My name is Darlene Lasher, and I own the property between Ardell and the Sea Scouts. I have a little over 100 feet wide, and I'd be happy to go and add to theirs. But it is currently rented to Duffy Electric Boats, and he's a great tenant, and I would like to keep him forever. But forever is an awfully long time. And if you're looking at trying to revitalize this area, I really believe, along with Dan, that this is something that should go back to you to be talked about with the 619-2 as the minimum frontage. Of course, I'd like you to put in 100, but on the other hand, just returning this to the 200 linear feet that could be 50% residential. I think it's essential not to put something like this into perpetuity or to wait until you do this kind of thing all over again 30 years from now. But I would like to recommend, and I know my family would, that you keep that 619-2 the way it was, or the way the Planning Commission said it. Thank you.
Good evening, members of the Newport Beach City Council. My name is Coralie Newman, and I'm a principal with Government Solutions at 230 Newport Center Drive. I just wanted to make a few comments also on this about mixed use and including the residential on the harbor side of the highway. I think that there was a lot of discussion about residential in Mariners Mile and the variety of uses that could go there. And one of the points that's in your report on page 63 with regard to Mariners Mile is I think it's important that there was also the statement in here that a majority of the people also oppose some of the visitor serving uses that are currently allowed, including hotels. So I think there's a real debate going on here about what should and shouldn't be on that side of the highway, and I think it's important for that to be considered. And there was a tremendous amount of support and observation that this area needs to be revitalized, and there was a lot of support through a number of these visioning sessions for residential in Mariners Mile. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Webb?
Are we finished with public comments?
Any other public comment on Mariners Mile? Okay, I'll close public comment, bring it back.
I'd like to propose that we accept the the GPAC recommendations with the exception of allowing for mixed use for the 800-foot strip westerly of the sea base on the bay side of the street.
Okay, that's one.
Obviously, I'll support that.
That's two. Mr. Salich?
No, I wouldn't support that without hearing from GPAC.
Okay, I would recommend that we send it back to GPAC.
Okay, is that okay? Is that okay for our mission tonight?
Yeah, that's what I thought you had done.
Okay. Well, no, but we're here for a different purpose. I mean, we're not concluding anything, but is that adequate to prepare the basis to do an EIR, et cetera?
Oh, we're doing the EIR with the residential, because that was the project description you approved.
It's fine.
We also sent out a mailer to everybody in the city of Newport Beach that indicated mixed use on the bay side of Coast Highway and Mariners Mile, just to let everybody in the community know what was being considered at the time.
Okay. What's next?
The last area for discussion, Corona Del Mar. You will see the policy components here. There are no changes, GPAC or Planning Commission for Corona Del Mar area. Again, it basically sustains the existing general plans, uses and densities, neighborhood commercial uses as well. It does provide the opportunity for consideration of parking by the reuse of adjoining residential parcels, adjoining the commercial properties for such on a voluntary basis, as well as the possibility of parking structures or parking facilities shared parking facilities being integrated into the corridor.
Okay, so what's before us? There's no changes?
There are no changes.
Okay. What do you need from us?
Any,
Whether you have changes.
whether you have
Any
changes.
changes?
I
Mr.
have no
Selich?
changes.
2. 3 from the councilman whose district it is. Okay. All right, you have direction. I'm going to open up for public comment. Corona Del Mar. I'm going to close it. Okay.
We're done.
They were, city clerk?
Public comments. Public comments are invited on non-agenda items generally considered to be within the subject matter jurisdiction of the council.
Public comment? I'll close it. City clerk?
Motion for reconsideration. A motion to reconsider the vote of any action taken by the city council at either this meeting or the previous meeting may be made only by one of the council members who voted with the prevailing side.
Any motions? No. Okay. I'm going to, before we adjourn, refer back to Mr. Ridgway.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would ask that we adjourn tonight in memory of Ruth Feuerstein, who died the day before, who passed away the day before Thanksgiving after suffering an unfortunate stroke. Her husband, Arnold, has been a lifelong supporter of this community. Her 2 children, Elliot and Roberta, are here staying with Arnold at this point in time. And Ruth was a wonderful lady who gave tirelessly to all charitable events, both of herself and financially. And she will be truly missed by all of us. And I would ask that we adjourn in memory of Ruth.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ridgway. Okay, we adjourned until Tuesday, December 6th at 7 o'clock.
I'm just going to make a comment.
Yes.
I was not aware of that meeting. I will not be here. I can come late, but nobody noticed me. I talked to Mr. Rosansky. He wasn't noticed. Even the manager didn't know.
And it was new. It was new on my calendar as well, because I had a continuing education class that I paid for and scheduled for that night. So it's new to me that we were meeting on the 6th.
Yeah, I'm just going to say I think we need to defer this, quite candidly. I'm sorry, but I mean, I made plans for that evening that.
It was on the schedule that we sent out a month
Yeah, but we
or 2
changed
ago.
that, Sharon.
Yes. But it was-
Remember, we basically said, hey, we don't want to do this. So, you know.
But then I sent a revised schedule.
I mean, I got one.
Well, we
Well,
could. Okay, yeah.
Mr. Mayor, we can do it on our study session of December the 13th, our next regular meeting.
What's the material that's going to be covered at that meeting?
Circulation element. So this is an important thing.
I'm not going to do that at a study session.
Well, we can start early.
Start at 3.
We can start at 3 on the study session. I just run on
13th. Okay, the proposal is to start the study session at 3 o'clock on December 13th instead of having a meeting on the 6th, and do the circulation component of the general plan. Okay, that's something that we should all weigh in on. We have one in favor of that.
I'm in favor of that.
Yes, but who else?
I think so.
And what else? That's our last meeting of the year as well. And Mr. City Manager, what else is going to be part of that agenda?
You know, we have a couple of items on the study session, but they're items that can wait.
No, I'm considering the regular agenda.
It's going to be a very long agenda
So we're having a long agenda with a long study session.
because we go a month between meetings and 3 weeks between last meeting and the one on the 13th.
And we have a new mayor election as well. Okay? All right, who else wants to do it on as a part of the study session? On the 13th.
I'd rather have it on the 6th, I guess.
Okay.
Or an alternative date, but.
Have it on the 6th.
Okay, we have one for the 6th. Mr. Selich?
6.
Mr. Rosansky?
6.
One more.
Well, I guess people have always accommodated my schedule, so I'd go for the 13th.
Okay, let's go for the 13th. Mr. Nichols?
Council meeting on the 13th,
Right.
So the question is, do we have a study session on the same?
and a long agenda on top of that.
I don't care.
What are some of the agenda items on the 13th that you're anticipating that'll take a long time?
Just the ones that I'm doing myself. We have a Lexus agreement coming back to the city council that would change the sales tax sharing agreement. We have the parameters for the two committees that council decided to form at the last meeting. We have, Patty, about 3 or 4 planning issues.
The Lennar housing project on Santa Barbara that you continued last time, the Bayside housing project.
And the LCP.
Oh, bring your pajamas and your
All right,
toothbrush.
so
December 6th.
Well, one of the reasons that we had the December 6th meeting was because we didn't want to have these long meetings. We were trying to split this stuff up, so that's why we decided to go
Well,
December
I'll
6th.
make it simple. I think in view of that, I think it should be the 6th.
Just a suggestion, I was looking up at the calendar, the 7th is an open date. I don't know if that makes it any better for everybody.
For what it's worth, I think speaking from staff, we'd rather do it on the 13th. It makes for a very long day, but having a special meeting, it's like we go 4 weeks in a row with a council meeting every week.
So
Those of us will be at the planning commission at 3 on the 6th. Don't really care.
The planning commission's meeting on 6th.
Yeah, I think we ought to go for the marathon on the 13th.
The 7th is fine, the 13th is fine. I'm just saying, I know I won't.
I wouldn't stack it, Homer. These two committees for City Hall could be an extended discussion to that effect.
It's going to be a long meeting. There's no question about it. It's going to be a long meeting whether you have a long study session before it or not. That isn't going to affect how long the meeting lasts.
Let me ask this, Todd. What's your conflict on that? Do you have a meeting or something?
I am interviewing legal firms for hiring at the Orange County Sanitation District, and it will go for hours. So I'm part of a committee interviewing attorneys.
Well, who can do it on the 7th? On Wednesday the 7th?
Well, the thing with it, I guess I had one question. It would seem like on the 13th, no matter how many items we have on the regular agenda, it doesn't affect the study session. We're proposing to do this during the study session period.
It's just that we're a little sharper if we haven't burned up 3 hours in a involved circulation element of the general plan, and then have a closed session, and then have a long regular session.
One other thing that just occurred to me was the community-wide newsletter mailer that Councilmember Webb mentioned a little while ago. We published all these dates in that, so that one says December 6th and 7th.
Well, we really haven't filled the seats up tonight.
Well, true. But circulation is a hot topic.
Well, it'd have to be hotter if we
We'll get
got
at
more
least
than 4
5 out of
people
that.
in the room.
Well, the 7th works for me.
Okay, 7th works.
I can do the 7th.
2. Mr. Rosansky?
I don't have my calendar with me, so I don't know.
Pick a bit.
Well, we're
Councilman
talking about
Daigle?
the evening.
A problem, but I mean, I can change my schedule.
Okay, so, city manager, if we change the 6th to the 7th, we start at 7 o'clock, can we do the circulation element that night? Get it out of the way.
Can we start at 7?
7.
7.
Yeah.
7 o'clock.
7. Actually, Donna and I have an LCP that afternoon, and Ed starts at 3.
Would you want to start at 6?
No, start at 7.
We're going to be here
We're better.
forever anyway.
Okay, so we will adjourn to Wednesday,
I'll be there. No, I got that on the calendar.
December 7th, 7 o'clock.
When is the LCP meeting?
3 o'clock that afternoon, is there, on the 7th?
Are you sure? 3 on the 7th?
3 on the 7th, yeah. You didn't have it?
No.
Okay, we will stand adjourned till Wednesday. Excuse, maybe not.
We need to check with our consultant on the circulation element. He's booked for the 6th, so we'll say it's the 7th unless he's...
No, we'll say it's the 7th until you tell us otherwise. Soon. I mean, within the next 24 hours, that'd be great. Then we won't be off track. All right, thank you.